Position. What's our position? Oh, we did. Or I got one. Yeah. I got the one. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I see Wendy. Did she must have caught it right when I was letting everyone know. Wendy Gibson. Oh, okay. I think it's I always said that, yeah.
I can't hear anything. Can't hear.
Do you guys know if we're waiting for,
Can't hear. Can't hear anything.
I show 2 minutes.
awesome, thank you.
I think we're only waiting on Senator San Buenaventura and Rep. Yamane. I think all the other task force members that said that they would be able to attend have joined. Okay, it's 12 o'clock. So I'd like to call this meeting of the dual use of cannabis task force meeting to order. With regards to member attendance for the purposes of establishing quorum, I show already 11 members in attendance. Barrett Otani and James Ireland are unable to attend. Senator San Buenaventura, have you been able to join? Representative Ryan Yamane. Okay. Well, being that as we have quorum, we can begin.
All right, so we have one in-person task force member present. I'm going to ask Mr. Erduli to please make sure the sound of your device and Zoom is muted at all times. Please speak into the microphone. Let me quickly summarize the agenda. For those members of the public who are watching the meeting on Zoom or listening by phone, we have 4 substantive agenda items today. The first substantive agenda item is a report by the Social Equity Working Group, co-chaired by Randy Gauntz and Garrett Hollywood. The second substantive agenda item is a report by the Medical Use Working Group, co-chaired by Terry Lynn Gorman and Nikos Leverins. The third substantive agenda item is a task force member discussion of the investigation findings of the task working group, chaired by Isaac Choi, and that were presented at the August 29th meeting. The fourth substantive agenda item is a task force member discussion of the investigation findings of the market structure working group, chaired by Randy Gauntz, and that were presented at the August 29th meeting. In terms of public testimony, as with previous task force member meetings, as testifiers, You will have 2 minutes to provide your testimony on the agenda items. I'll give you a 30-second warning, and we'll call time at 2 minutes to provide everyone the opportunity to speak while allowing adequate time for the task force members to work through the agenda items. Testifiers, all testimony will only be heard before each agenda item. Even though today the task force is meeting remotely, we will still entertain in-person testimony, then online testifiers, and then phone testimony. So let's turn to agenda item 2. Right now, I have 2 in-person individuals who would like to testify on agenda item 2. And to be clear, that means you wish to testify about the upcoming report by the Social Equity Working Group, co-chaired by Mr. Gons and Mr. Holly. If your testimony relates to multiple agenda items, please limit your testimony to just the agenda item we are taking testimony on at the time. So for now, that is agenda item 2, the Social Equity Working Group. Now ready for in-person testifiers. The first is Mr. Medeiros. Mr. Medeiros? Welcome. Yeah, right there's fine.
Just talking to the microphone?
Yeah.
Okay. Testing. Hello, Mike Hockel, Alfred Capping on Medeiros, Koinoa, Waianae Moku. I read this whole thing about social equity. Great write-up, Randy Gons. First off, thank you guys for letting me speak on this. As much as I like everything it's saying, I am opposed by it. We talk about Kanaka Mole. I'm a Kanaka Mole. There's a lot of issues about Kanaka Mole being discussed about this, and it's referencing how Kanaka Mole will benefit off of this, but it doesn't state clearly on how so. We talk about Hawaiian land, about this too. How is that going to be displaced amongst the people? You know, our biggest concern, especially as a farmer, as a cannabis farmer, as a all practitioner, as a mahiai that grows multiple things, is the outside people coming in, corporate entities coming in and just taking over, right? It doesn't talk about that. It doesn't intel on that, you know, on how we're gonna stop this from happening, because we're in Hawaii. We're already going through issues as it is, water poisoning from our Navy, land problems within Kanaka Mole and Hawaiians, you know, the trust within the system being broken. You see the people getting arrested that haven't been doing things properly. Now, what will stop the big corporate from coming in and just profiting off of all Hawaii right now as we're broken? You know, this is a big thing. So I say I am opposed to this. I'm opposed because of no corporate profit-driven plantation style cannabis farms. And yes, the small farms owned by Native Hawaiians and local legacy farmers. These farms should have a 5K square canopy cap and promote diversified agriculture.
30 seconds.
I say yes to unlimited retail to small farms, ability to sell direct to consumers and 3 to 9 card patients and licensed dispensaries all over Hawaii. I say yes to holding licensed corporations accountable to community for annual reports and environmental impact, best labor practices and social injustice. For survivors of war and drugs, if they aren't helping the community, do not renew their license at all, never again. This is a concern for all Kanaka Mole, especially in Hawaii, because we know cannabis brings a lot of money.
And Mr. Medeiros, I'm gonna ask you to wrap it up. That's 2 minutes.
So I just hope that there's a concern for the people of Hawaii first and foremost. Before you guys talk about equity, think about the first words in that social. We are the people. Talk to the Kanaka first. Get insight to the farmers. Come to the lands that we are farming on and see firsthand.
Thank you, Mr. Medeiros.
Mahalo for you guys' time.
And
Thank you.
there might be some questions for you, so.
Definitely.
We can see here. Thank you, sir. Any questions from the task force for Mr. Medeiros? Hearing none. Thank you, sir.
Wait a minute, Chair.
Actually, I would like,
Chair,
I have a question.
I'm sorry, I did the wrong symbol here.
Sure. Do you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. Mr. Medeiros, how would you define Native Hawaiian?
Kanaka Mole by blood. We have the blood of the land, you know, we come from here. That's what Native Hawaiian means. We have the cocoa. That's what I am. you
Would
know,
cocoa
we're very
be important? Kikiokaina doesn't count?
I mean, what is that?
Kikiokaina doesn't count?
You mean being
Born here?
Born here, yeah, you can be born here, sure. You're a resident here, Kama Aina, not Keiki Okaina. Keiki Okaina is a Keiki of the Aina.
Okay, so
So Kama Aina, yes, for sure, definitely, being a one of that. But there should be a better process, because anybody can just be a resident and, apply for a license. But are they really taking care of the land? Are they really taking care of the people? There needs to be more due process on that part. Because you're just gonna give land to people and then what? Big development's gonna come in and do as they wish. Look what's happening to Macau. Look what's
Mr.
happening to
Daenerys.
Koloa and Kauai.
Mr. Dippendaris, as a regulator, I just want somebody to tell me what the rules for Native Hawaiians are, for local. Those are the terms that you use. As a regulator, how am I supposed to figure out
Well, let's
who's?
say a part of the task force, there's not one person that's Kanaka Mo'oli involved in the task force. And yet we're talking about Kanaka and benefiting from this. So that's something that needs to be talked about as well. There's not one person that has the blood of Kanaka on this task force. And
Yeah,
yet
no,
there
no.
explains about this as Kanaka Mo'oli. So you
Yeah,
gotta
so-
understand why I'm here. I am a Kanaka. I am a person of this Aina. I go way back beyond these times. And that's why it's of concern, because everything is being stolen. Not only just the land, our language, our culture, and everything that we worked hard for. So know why I'm saying that the Koko means Kanaka Mo'oli. Native Hawaiian is that. That's what Kanaka Mo'oli is.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
We can talk about this later. We can educate each other about Native Hawaiian practices and everything.
Thanks.
And we're more than welcome to come to the Aina and see what we grow on the farms.
Any other task force
And you
members?
call for everybody in here.
Mr. Maderas. Any other task force members have a question for Mr. Maderas?
Hello, guys.
Seeing none, thank you.
I do have a question. I raised my hand and I'm trying to,
Okay.
I-
So I'm
I-
having- I
can you get,
apologize.
okay. I'd like to, take him up on his invitation to come to the lands and talk to the people. And I'd like to get your contact information so that we can do that. Would you leave
Definitely, I
that?
appreciate you, Wendy.
Thank you.
I thank you so much for everything. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mahalo.
Any other task force members have any questions for Mr. Maderas?
Every Sunday, 9 a.m., Mount Ka'ala.
All right, the next testifier is Ms. Poe. Thank you, Ms. Poe.
I wanted to stand on my written testimony, but I wanted to also add something, specifically related to the report. So my name is May, I'm a family nurse practitioner. I actually wouldn't be a nurse practitioner if it wasn't for, expungement. I have a cannabis offense and, luckily I had an amazing attorney and my charge was expunged, but I did have to go through an entire process with the Board of Nursing. So I almost wasn't here literally because of a paraphernalia charge when I was young. So just really, really emphasizing the importance of having automatic expungement, and to what Garrett added into the report of having it not be in the hands of the Department of Justice, but having it be an independent review board that really helps to make this possible. So that people who have had cannabis offenses can, actually have lives. Like, it's crazy to think that I couldn't be here now because of a paraphernalia charge, and that there's tons of other people out there who are exactly like me. And if I hadn't gotten that
30
expungement,
seconds.
okay, so I really wanted to thank them for adding that, and for also adding the portion of having it be an independent oversight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Poe. Any questions for Ms. Poe from task force members? All right, seeing none, thank you so much. Are there any other folks here in person who wish to testify on this agenda item? Okay, so online testifiers, if anyone online would like to submit testimony on agenda item 2, please raise your hand. When I call your name, you'll be asked to unmute. Please go ahead and unmute yourself. If you feel comfortable, please turn on your camera. Do we have any online testifiers?
Yes. Yeah.
We have someone who's just identified themselves as Alex. Alex, are you ready to proceed?
Aloha, my name is Alex.
Go ahead.
I'm a 329 patient and caregiver. I'm submitting testimony on this dual use meeting agenda item number 2, social equity. Mainland Haole corporate-owned cannabis dispensaries will not benefit the people and the residents of Hawaii. It will only exacerbate the widening wealth gap and enable further gentrification of the Hawaiian Islands. The money and profits will leave the state of Hawaii and benefit many Haole companies who are based out of other states and other countries. Yes, the government may get its cut via taxes, but as we all know, the government is wasteful and inefficient with the reallocation of tax dollars. The residents and medical patients and growers will lose out immensely if the political agenda is to push everyone to the dispensary. You must ensure that medical patients' rights to grow for themselves and for other patients is protected and preserved in perpetuity. Make tourists, Haole transplants, and non-Hawaiian entities pay the premium price to operate in the legal Hawaiian cannabis industry. They can afford to pay the premium price, and doing business as a Haole in Hawaii is a privilege and a luxury. Levy a tax similar to the transient accommodations tax, the TAT, which will shift the financial burden onto those who are purchasing and imbibing cannabis for any other reason but medicinal use and who are not full-time residents in the state of Hawaii. Discontinue the use of the term recreational cannabis. It is irresponsible to label the plant and its many healthful and beneficial products as such. If we do not call legal alcohol sales recreational, then why would we call cannabis sales recreational? The state of Hawaii is responsible for minimizing the incidence of tourists and transplants. Minimizing the incidence of tourist transplants and local residents from using the plant medicine in any other way than positive, healing, spiritual, uplifting, and peaceful means. We cannot afford more dumb and carefree tourists and transplants causing accidents and treating Hawaii as their tropical vacation playground where they can act and behave without respect or consequence. Mahalo for your time.
Thank you, Alex. Task force members, any questions for Alex? All right, seeing none, we have Dr. Clifton Otto, Mr. Otto. Dr. Otto.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair, members of the task force. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on today's agenda. Dr. Clifton Otto, on agenda item 2, I really appreciate the intent of the social equity movement, but what I'm having trouble understanding is how can we ask all of these individuals who have been disproportionately criminalized for cannabis to then join a so-called industry in which they could potentially risk their life savings and suffer several other negative consequences because they have to join a program that violates federal law. I would suggest including a recommendation that the legislature and the next governor of Hawaii take further steps to end the federal conflict with marijuana and protect the state's authority over the interstate use of cannabis. Also on page 8, recommendations, cannabis justice reform, there's mention to descheduling, complete descheduling, which I'm assuming is at the state level. And I hope that Administrator Radula will correct me if I'm wrong, but I do not believe that the Department of Public Safety can support the descheduling of cannabis at the state level if there isn't a corresponding change at the federal level. We already have a state exemption for the so-called medical, or I would say non-drug use of cannabis for our medical cannabis program. And so my recommendation, I would suggest a recommendation to the legislature to extend the current scheduling exemption for the state authorized.
30 seconds, Doctor, if you could wrap it up, please.
I suggest a recommendation that the legislature extend the current scheduling exemption for the state authorized non-drug use or medical use of cannabis to include adult use. Those are my comments. I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Questions for Dr. Otto from the task force? Anyone?
This is James. This is James Ireland. Sorry, I'm remote. Dr. Odo, have you had any luck with our congressional delegation in this regard in the past?
Thanks, Dr. Ireland, for that question. I have tried over the past several years to engage our congressional delegates to get some assistance. And it's very difficult to really get a dialogue going with these offices. I've gotten responses to my inquiries, a lot of which simply say that they will keep my thoughts in mind. But I'm hoping that they could help us somehow navigate this path towards working out something with the DEA as Congress tries to figure this out. The congressional delegates that I have heard from will point out the bills that they have been working on, like the federal research bill and those kinds of things. But they're not offering anything that we could act on immediately. And we saw some very quick action with Red Hill. And I'm asking that they take kind of a similar approach with this federal conflict and draw attention to it and start a dialogue with the DEA so that we could start to make some progress in the meantime.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions? Any other questions for Dr. Oliver? All right, seeing none, thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
The next online testifier is Joseph Rosenbaum. Mr. Rosenbaum.
Yes, thank you to the task force. Attorney Joseph Rosenbaum. I am a local civil rights attorney who's been practicing in the area of marijuana, medical cannabis. For my entire career, I represent patients, doctors, cooperatives, collectives, and individuals that have been arrested falsely and in normal police raids for cannabis, whether that be legal or illegal cannabis. I've been involved with dispensaries on the mainland in Oregon and also in Chicago. The issues with social equity that I see is that oftentimes some person that's been identified as a minority is used by the moneyed few and their name is put down on the application and they're allowed to be the social equity partner. But then once they get the dispensary, these people are bought out for hundreds of thousands of dollars by those with the money. So the real issue is it's just a big sham, right? So these people come in, oh, we're going to help these African Americans, the Kanaka Maoli, we're going to help, whoever is identified as the minorities. And these people are not really having any say in these businesses. And they're forced to be bought out oftentimes for less than what their portion would be worth. And then what we have here is a system where you have to have the token minority on your within your company to get your license, but then they dump these people on the side and buy them out. And the people that we're trying to control from having 100% monetary and legal control over these entities are now in 100% control. So I think it's something the task force and ultimately—
You have 30 seconds left. I'm going to ask you to wrap it up if you could, please.
Sure. This is something that the legislature, along with the task force, has to address, which is how do we have true social equity within these programs without these people just coming on to be inevitably bought out?
Thank you. Task force members, questions for Mr. Rosenbaum,
I have a question.
please.
Yes. So have you seen any successful models in any of the states?
No, I have not seen one because in this, and I haven't reviewed every state's program, but the ones that I'm directly connected to, all of these states do not have a safeguard in place whereby these people cannot be bought out. Now, everyone has free liberty in this country, so it's a very difficult thing to enforce, right? How do we force somebody to remain in a business structure once they decide I no longer want to be within this structure for whatever reason? So it's difficult to regulate, I guess.
Any follow-up question or any additional questions by task force members for Mr. Rosenbaum? Seeing none, thank you very much, sir. The next testifiers identified themselves as Professor He. Professor He.
Hello there. I appreciate the invite. It was short notice. I didn't write anything up in particular, but I do have a medical card in Hawaii. as well as several other states that I reside in. I've been in the industry and I breed cannabis solely for medicinal purposes, but I've also been involved in the recreational market, quote unquote, in Oregon for years since the transition. And one of my main concerns is being a medical patient and being, you know, on both sides of the coin here. I see the medical community getting steamrolled after the fact. And as far as I know, there's been nothing spoken about safeguarding the patients and their rights. And the foundation of this has been built on the medical community's back. And that's one thing that every state that I visit and every state that I work in, it's been the common occurrence that the medical community is used as a stepping stone to get to where the corporate entities come in and override the system. And this has been, you know, I speak from experience. I've worked in Oklahoma, Arkansas, Massachusetts, Maine, Oregon, Washington, California, so many states.
30 seconds, please, to wrap up your testimony.
Yes, sir. So that's one of my main concerns is being a patient over there is the safeguarding of the patient's rights and the grower's rights. This has been a common occurrence every single state that they push over to legalization and recreational. It always is the patients that suffer most because most of them are low income and trying just to be self-sufficient in their ways of managing the pain. I appreciate the time.
I want to give the task force an opportunity to ask you any questions that they might have. Task force
Sure.
members, any questions of Professor Pete?
I don't have a question. Oh, go ahead. I have comments. Go ahead.
Same. I just wanted to let Professor know that, you know, it is one of the explicit goals of this task force to look at protecting medical patients and the potential impact that legalization could have on them. So we do have some very strong recommendations about how to protect medical patients. There will be a medical use report coming out attached to that permitted interaction group that suggests some very strong language around how we protect patients. And it's absolutely at the front of all of our minds to make sure we achieve that goal. And we appreciate you advocating for our patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guns. I know we have another question or comment from a task force member.
Well, I was just going to comment that it was addressed at the last meeting. So if you watch the video of the last meeting, one of the groups did start to address the medical patients' protections, but kind of deferred to the medical use working group, and we'll be making our presentation today. So hang in with us and you'll hear what we have to say.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Professor P before we move on to the next virtual testifier? Seeing none. The next testifier virtually is Mr. Mike Smith. Mr. Smith?
Aloha, can you guys hear me?
We can hear you very clearly.
Great, thanks for having me. I'll be real brief. I'm a 329 medical patient here. It is very important for me in the sense of monetary. I am not rich by any means. I cannot afford going to the dispensary. I need my rights protected as a farmer, as a grower. These dispensaries, the medicine that's coming out of here is absolutely mediocre. It's disgusting. Put on the map to any other state, we are losing. We are failing hard here. The only places that I can procure proper medication is from local organic farmers. We need to protect those rights of those patients. We need to protect our rights to grow. These dispensaries do not know what these patients need in their healings. And so we really need to go ahead and protect it. I'm looking forward to the next meeting. I am really looking forward to what the task force has to say as far as strong verbiage to protect our rights. So let's get there. Thanks for my time. Aloha.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any questions, task force members, for Mr. Smith? Seeing none. Thank you very much, sir. The next virtual testifier is Mr. Reese Miller. Mr. Miller?
Hello, thank you guys for having me. I'm a 329 patient and a college student. I write about cannabis for a living. So one of the things that I really don't want to see is having to have myself write about Hawaii in the sense of corruption. With the emergence of recreational and medical markets, it really does proliferate the amount of corruption that happens. And like, there's really three things I want to hit on. Like, I know we don't have a lot of time here. First is licensing caps. That's a surefire way to hit corruption. Once all the caps are filled, companies will very easily go beyond, above and beyond in their pursuit of those limited licenses. Second is community impact fees. Large businesses will find ways to get past that. It was like 3% in Massachusetts. They would buy playgrounds, throw parades, anything to get around that monetary cap. And somebody hit on social equity, and I really want to like emphasize the fact that social equity licenses should not be transferable, or they should be able to be transferred over a specific amount of years. And the state should be able to create a checklist of non-delegatable duties to minorities, or like not limited to high-level decision making.
Mr. Miller, if you could wrap up your testimony, please.
Managing operations, structure, and strategizing. Like, if a company that's qualified as social equity business is found to violate these requirements, the authority should be able to suspend that business's license. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Task force members, questions for Mr. Miller? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next testifier, which is Mr. Sam Delapaz. Mr. Delapaz.
Yes, hello, Honorable Dual Use Task Force. I really appreciate everyone's input here and the social equity working group's hard and diligent work around this issue. I really want to speak to the first speaker regarding the Kanaka, and the local community, most importantly, Indigenous Native Hawaiians. I think that it's very important that an advisory board be formed around social equity for the regulatory body. I think it's very important that that board consists of diversified members, of course, Indigenous Native Hawaiians being at the top of that list. And also, there are so many different demographics here on the island. This is absolutely a legacy producing land. I come from Northern California. I've seen every market successfully botch social equity. Not one of them has pulled it off correctly or protected the patients, the people, the small business operators, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's very, very important that an advisory board be formed and that it—
President Biden said in a statement, difficult decisions were made to secure—
that it be comprised of all the different demographics affected. There are legacy producers here in Hawaii who may not be of native blood, who have been producing and stewarding this plant for decades. And I think it's very important that they are recognized. I think that anyone who suffered under prohibition, medical providers, patients, this is very, very, very important that we prioritize social equity, and we have a small window to really prioritize it as well, because once federal legalization is a reality—
30 seconds, I'm going to ask you to wrap up your testimony.
Thank you. Once federal legalization is a reality, we are subject to the Dormant Commerce Clause, and that does not allow us to fully restrict other operators, multi-state operators and things like that from coming in here. So putting the protections, incentives in place, I appreciate the language around corporate responsibility and making sure that social justice is met, environmental justice is met, and that Hawaii is a steward and pioneer.
You've now exceeded 2 minutes, so I'm going to ask the task force if they have any questions for you. Task force members, any questions for Mr. Delapaz?
I've got a quick comment. Thanks, Sam. I appreciate your input. You know, and I want to highlight that, you know, your advisory board recommendation is spot on. We do have advisory board recommendation in our social equity report, which we will be reporting on. And just to offer some context and the reasoning behind this is we believe that Native Hawaiians are able to do self-determination. Those who have been hurt by the war on drugs have the ability to self-determine kind of where they can see benefits from this industry. So we do have an example of what a possible makeup of the social equity board, advisory board within the regulatory structure could look like. But by no means is that a prescription. We heavily encourage this task force and the possible regulatory authority that could come to reach out to those communities and figure out in which ways they can be represented. We also have some formerly incarcerated individuals recommended on those advisory committees, those who work in prison and jail reentry. So again, I really appreciate you highlighting that issue. It's something that we really focused on heavily and we completely agree with. So we hope that those recommendations stand strong.
Thank you, Randy. I agree. And I appreciate the outreach to some of the criminal justice reform and social equity organizations. And I know multiple more personally who are very boots on the ground and very involved with reentry efforts, criminal justice reform, expungement. Please don't hesitate to reach out for anything you guys may need in support of, you know, formulating these type of structures. Thank you.
Thank you for that offer. Task force members, any other questions? For this
Yeah,
one?
I've got a question for Sam, if I may.
Director
Sam,
Cho.
first of all, thank you very much for your very detailed testimony. I read the whole thing. It seems like you're very much against over policing and heavy-handed law enforcement and over regulation of this particular industry. But your particular testimony is so detailed that I'm thinking just your testimony alone will cause overregulation, heavy-handed enforcement. And so I'm just wondering, where's the balance in this thing? Are you saying that you know you want all this social equity, all this kind of stuff, but you don't want any type of, well, limited regulation? How do you reconcile your statements?
Thank you. That is a great question. I would love to speak to that. Again, this is around slow rolling legalization. I believe that the state of Hawaii has the opportunity to move on Hawaii time and to slow roll what no other state has done, which is they have all come out of the gate with very fast, rapid legalization that has flooded markets, that has disenfranchised minority communities and communities harmed by the war on drugs. And all I'm recommending is that these boxes need to be checked, but they need to be checked with due diligence in a meaningful way by an advisory board, by a regulatory body that is listening to the community, because most of the mistakes made in all the states that I've seen legalized, primarily California, the worst example that there is that they have not communicated with the stakeholders to a sufficient extent. And that causes a bunch of backpedaling. And when I say overregulation and trying to reduce the amount of burden on the administration, that is literally going to reduce the amount of energy the administration has to put out, because they actually understand the way the market works and who's being harmed by these laws and who's being included by these laws. That is my input. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you,
Any other
Chair.
questions? Thank you, Director Choi. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a quick question for him.
Please.
Sam, as you talk about slow rolling, how do you interact or advise kind of slow rolling of the industry itself versus kind of the rapidity with which we want to stop putting people in jail for cannabis? How do those two things interact with each other?
That is a great question. And that's a tough one. You know, it's important to regulate the, gray market supply, especially, and the import of cannabis into a state that is trying to establish infrastructure, for an example. But it is definitely difficult to, on one hand, say we have to figure out ways to persecute this. And then on another hand, say that we need to expunge, right? I think that it comes down to, there's different things that can be levied. We've seen it in California, which, has worked to some extent in small capacities, but not in larger ones. And that is fines and other, limited access.
That's not it.
But yeah, exactly. It's very, very difficult. I think that overall, you're looking at, yes, you have to enforce and you have to regulate, but you also have to create access and create opportunity at the same time. And it is a balanced effect. So rapidly expanding licensing and oversaturating can be a problem. It's difficult.
But you can't keep arresting people who have the legal right to use this.
Sir, I'm not sure who you are. I'd ask you to stop inserting yourself, please.
Agreed. You definitely cannot just, be trying to undo the harms done by the war on drugs and keep arresting people for it either. Absolutely not. It is very, very tedious. And again, this is where I say advisory board committees and the stakeholders being a part of the conversation is of the utmost importance, because then you understand the lay of the land. Remember, this is a prohibition underground industry that has been established for over 50 years. So it requires very meaningful and very responsible undoing. It's very difficult to answer the question in this capacity. More easy to answer, yeah, by inclusion.
Thank you, Mr. Del Paz. Any other questions, Mr. Del Paz, from task force members before we move on?
Oh, I would just like to thank him for his testimony and please leave his contact information.
You heard that.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
The chat is disabled.
We're now prepared to hear from Mr. Devon Ward. Mr. Ward.
Yeah, good afternoon, Devon Ward, Marijuana Policy Project, Hawaii resident, 329 car holder. I just want to applaud the Social Equity Working Group for their diligence in this report. It's very, very comprehensive. It touches on all the big areas of equity, market opportunities, record expungement, and then community reinvestment. And I know they were one of the few working groups, believe the only working group to actually go out and host listening sessions within the community. So I do want to applaud them for that. But just wanted to leave a comment with the task force. A lot of folks have talked about how social equity measures have failed in other states. And the reason for that, in my belief, is that this industry is a hard industry to be in, generally, whether you're an equity applicant or whether you're a licensee. And so, equity applicants in other states have suffered the same fate as a lot of regular businesses, and that the cannabis industry is a tough industry to compete in. The profit margins are thin. It is an agricultural business, and that's only going to get more difficult to compete with federal prohibition being lifted. And so I would caution the task force members that the market opportunities are great, but it's hard to predict winners and losers in business, and a better.
You're freezing up periodically, Mr. Ward.
I'm sorry. Through the lens of expungements and through the lens of community reinvestment. In Illinois, the governor there is expunged.
Testimony, please. 30 seconds.
In Illinois, the governor's expunged over 500,000 records. In California, the same thing. In Colorado, they've built schools with their cannabis revenue. Those are things you can count on, as opposed to trying to pick a couple market operators to be successful. And so I just really urge the committee to really look at the community reinvestment and expungement pieces in the equity report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Task force members, questions for Mr. Ward?
I just wanted to thank Mr. Ward for his comment. This is something that the Permitted Interaction Group really took a look at, and you're not wrong. When looking at other states and their programs, there are a lot of businesses that aren't able to make it, and profit margins are really difficult. This is one of the hardest industries right now. And so we did really have a robust on community reinvestment, ensuring that tax revenues from the cannabis industry go back into the communities that were disproportionately hurt by the war on drugs. There's a pretty extensive preamble to kind of stating the impacts of some of the programs that Hawaii has had, including Green Harvest, things of that nature, and really appreciate the comment. When we do our presentation, you will see that most of our comments are kind of heavily geared towards the community and reinvestment, the expungement, and then we'll wrap it up with the market equity and state how we can encourage individuals from the social equity space to get involved for sure. So again, we appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gauntz. Any questions for Mr. Ward before we move on? Seeing none, thank you, sir. And the next virtual testifier is Mr. James Anthony. Mr. Anthony?
So I'm going to speak first on behalf of the Hawaii Cannabis Hui, and then I'm going to make a couple of remarks just for myself personally. So you've seen the 4-point Hui plan, and there's no need to repeat that. You will hear it again and again. There's a 5th point, which is really the beginning point, which is that there is no need for any complex, overregulated, overtaxed, so-called legalization scheme if what you are concerned about is the historical and grotesque injustices of the war on drugs. There's a very simple solution to that. Decriminalize, stop arresting people, stop putting people in jail for this plant. Just stop it. You don't have to make anybody else rich doing that. So think about that if that is what you mean by social equity. Absolutely expunge, but if you just didn't arrest people and put them in jail in the first place, you have the OHA report showing how grotesquely disproportionately racist that project has been for many decades. Cut it out. Secondly, we should absolutely be aware and beware of race-based social equity programs. Those will absolutely not pass muster in the federal courts. It could perhaps be a factor among others, and certainly Hawaii should look at piggybacking onto existing federal programs that benefit Native Hawaiians. And if you don't know what those are, you are on the wrong task force. The other possible source are, of course, the estates and trusts that benefit Native Hawaiians, including the Kamehameha schools. Finally, thank you so much. And finally, our plan, you will notice, does not hinge on any race-based favoritism. Rather, what it does is it diminishes the market, keeping it to very small farms, which are beautiful, and really deprofitizing this plant. There is no reason for anybody to think that they are going to get rich on a plant that grows quite simply. So if you focus on that, you will be in much better shape.
Mr. Anthony, I exceed your time.
Finally, I wanted to say to Mr. Gauntz that the Hui absolutely invites him and the other.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, they can ask your questions now. Task force members, questions for Mr. Anthony based on what he shared.
Yes, hi, Nikos Leverance of Hawaii Health and Harm Reduction Center. James, thanks for your testimony. What is the minimum level of decriminalization or legalization that the legislature should consider, regardless of its ability to implement a dual use program? And secondly, could you talk a little bit more about not having programs that give something like a preference to our indigenous community here? Just wanted to inquire more. Are we talking about sort of expanding existing minority and business, minority and women-owned business enterprises? Please expand. Thank you.
Mr. Anthony, you ready?
Anthony, you're muted.
You're muted. You're muted. There you
Thank
go.
you. Thank you, Mr. Leverance. Thank you, convener. I'll take those one at a time. First, as to the decriminalization issue. Decriminalization is very, very simple. Expand what is allowed, right? I think at the moment, there's been a very feeble attempt to come down from misdemeanor possession is an infraction at 3 grams, which is a completely meaningless amount. Right? Cannabis moves around in 1/8 of ounces, which is 3.5 grams, which leaves everybody facing criminal misdemeanor prosecution for the simple act of carrying a little cannabis around. So raise that to some reasonable amount, 1 ounce, 4 ounces, some reasonable amount. And why should it even be an infraction? Just make that legal, right? At that point, possession is legal. Portugal has taken this approach for decades. I don't see blood running in the streets or babies being impaled on pitchforks. The same thing with cultivation. Cultivation needs to not be a felony. It should be a misdemeanor at most, if not an infraction, perhaps depending on some level. So if you simply decriminalize or legalize cultivation and possession, then you don't have the need for this huge complicated structure. People will do exactly what they have done for decades, which is they will grow and provide high quality, organically grown outdoor cannabis through the community, right? This is not rocket science and it is not uranium. All of this is completely unnecessary. And if you want to have some kind of license program, that's great. We can figure that out, as Mr. De La Paz suggested, on a kind of a slow roll. But let's just start by expanding decriminalization and expanding and horizontalizing the medical program and see how that goes. And maybe that will show us the way to an enlightened form of legalization. Start with decriminalization. Your second question was about what to do if we did have a legal licensing system for commercial cannabis, and how would we preference Native Hawaiian or other people of color, immigrants, low income, these sorts of beneficiary groups, veterans, women, what have you. Absolutely, the existing programs where those factors are taken into consideration as one among several factors, previously incarcerated status, things like that, that can work. And as I say, with Native Hawaiians in particular, we do have some particular existing programs. But even more fundamentally, before we get to that stage, if we structure the market so that there are no 1.5 million square foot farms, that is the largest farm in California at the moment, right? Glass House has 1.5 million square feet of flowering canopy. We cannot allow that to happen in Hawaii. That is a plantation. So if we limit the size of the farms and do not allow any overlapping ownership of farm licenses, then we will have what we have now, hundreds of little farms run by local farmers who have a relationship with the plants they grow and the land that they grow it on. If you start there, you are already way ahead of the game, because that system is not attractive to big capital. Make a system that is not attractive to big capital. Make it small, require that they show social benefits, environmental benefits, best labor practices, and that they are addressing the harms of the war on drugs. If they are required to do that, it will confuse them, it will confuse their investors, and they will stay away from Hawaii. And I say, good riddance.
Thank you, Mr. Anthony. Task force members, any questions for Mr. Anthony before we move on? Seeing none, thank you, sir. We're now ready to hear from 808 CAMO, is the way you've identified yourself, 808 CAMO.
Camo, James Trice of Camo. I'm more than sure that you've known me. Very disappointed, man. We've been going through this for many, many months, if not years. Michelle, Broderick, many of the others. I know you know me. We go through this all the time. Patients' right to grow must be protected, must be protected. And the right to grow herbs and the right to companion plant hemp with other sustainable gardens like red clover, garlic, onion, lettuce, dandelion, thyme, peppermint, it's all legal and it's already being done. You're talking about looking for legalizations and things about what if. We already have. Thanks to Dr. Otto, 808 Cannabis has been working very diligently to get us the exemption for medical cannabis. That's how we got medical cannabis day with all the state mayors signing off on the paperwork. Limit the farm size, no multiple licensing. That works out to workforce development for Hawaiians. Cultivation is not a felony, especially if you are a patient. You have your 329 card, you're protected by the state. USDA and state law protections work against this federal interference.
You're breaking up periodically. We want to make sure we can hear you.
I promise I'll type it. If you need me to redo it, I'll do it again. We have great social equity opportunity for Native Hawaiians. If you are a local, you can hear me, right? If you are a veteran and you are going to jail for possession or something related to medical cannabis, you can petition the court and go for Veterans Treatment Court. Judge Kubo was actually the judge over there at Veterans Treatment Court. We helped a lot of disabled veterans get through that court. We have the opportunity to take care of it. We have the opportunity and the resources in state and in town to prevent many of these arrests for disabled veterans and other disadvantaged people. You what? How can you not hear me when I'm watching the microphone pick up? That's very disrespectful.
Sorry, we can't hear you. But what I do want to, based
How
on.
do you not hear me and I'm staring at the microphone, pick up the audio right now?
Mr. Carroll.
This is the third time you've done this, every time we have these meetings. How do you not hear me, but you're complaining right now?
Okay, task force members, based on.
You don't hear me, but you're complaining about not hearing me?
Do you have any questions?
The entire task force can hear this.
And we did have a difficult time hearing everything. So if you're able to submit that in writing, that would be very helpful for us. We want to make sure that.
Would you like it right here or would you like it in a Gmail? Because we can do this all day. And I do feel very disrespected.
We're gonna have to move on. Mr. Eric Foster.
That's very disrespectful. That's the third time that goes on video file. You do understand this, right?
Mr. Foster.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eric Foster. I'm the National Policy Director for Cannabis and Hemp for Minorities for Medical Marijuana. Thank you for having this meeting and want to say that we at M4MM are glad to be a part of and are looking to be a proactive part going forward with these activities to establish this dual market. Having had a lot of experience working personally at the company I work for at cannabis policy at a federal level, state level, there's a lot of best practice.
Feedback you're hearing is coming from an unmuted person. Need to unmute everyone. Need to mute everyone.
They have. Do you know?
On your side, on this side.
It appears to be-
Online, it's okay.
Appears to be on Clearview. Is there anything we can do?
I think it's able to finish with a little bit more time.
Tech feedback.
IT Tech 1, I think, is unmuted and causing feedback.
So,
Whatever adjustment we make. Go ahead, sir. Please continue.
okay. All right. So a few things to take into consideration. One, you're not going to have federal legalization anytime
Mute
over.
all mics.
I'm sorry. If someone's interrupting, please give the gentleman an opportunity to speak. Mr. Foster, please proceed.
Okay. So as I was saying that, so we don't need to worry about the federal piece. The focus needs to be on what to happen in each state. There's ways to codify the opportunities for diversity and ownership, but also to add in supplier diversity, employment and recruiting and career mobility goals, as well as community reinvestment. Medical research is something critical that needs to be tied in to the statutory law. There are a number of states that have put forth really solid statutory law. And actually, we at the company I work for, separate of M4MM, have written one for the state of Michigan. We want to make sure that that's included.
Yeah, Mr. Foster, I apologize. We're having some technical issues. We're not able to hear you clearly. We were able to hear you at the beginning, but over the last 5 to 10 seconds, we were not. Why don't you
Okay.
continue? Let's see. Let's see. If we can hear you. Why don't you continue?
Liar.
What I was saying is that we want to work with, you know, and so what I guess I can say is that we're working on some suggestions and recommendations based on best practices of language that we can provide to help Hawaii in this worthwhile endeavor to make sure that it works to the best of the ability to also not run afoul of the Dormant Commerce Clause. That is a consideration you have to factor in, because in Maine, in Michigan, in Ohio, and in Missouri, statutory requirements for residency or race-based programming requirements were found illegal based on the Dormant Commerce Clause, but we at M4MM know how to craft language and ways to stay inside of that as well as still achieve the goals. So thank you for allowing me to participate. Look forward to participating more in the future. I don't know if anybody heard that.
I did.
I did.
Yes, we did. Thank you. I think
Heard
right
you
now
just fine.
we cannot hear Judge Broderick.
I think if the judge is asking, does anybody have any questions for me?
Yeah, because the chat is disabled.
The chat is disabled for all the meetings.
Yeah, I thank you, Mr. Foster, for your testimony.
Yeah,
tell
but
me-
anyone can unmute.
Can you tell me again the name of the group that you're working with?
Minorities for Medical Marijuana. We're the
Oh.
largest community-based trade and advocacy group in cannabis and hemp in the country. We've got 28 state chapters, 4 international chapters, 2 HBCUs, and are looking to expand to 4. We have a full federal policy platform, but we also have a detailed state by state and have been working state by state to try to address.
We just worked with you recently here as well, right?
Yes, we do have a state director that's working in Hawaii as well. And
Right. We just did an event out at Jason's farm, right?
yes.
Thank you.
And I would ask, hopefully, can you all get the Hawaii Rainbow football games on some sort of TV that we can see mainland? Because I do like the Rainbows. I was a fan of Colt Brenton's and would love to watch the home games, but they don't broadcast them anywhere in the mainland.
Any other questions for Mr. Foster? Now I'm going to come back and ask if you have any questions for Mr. Camel. Any questions, remaining questions for Mr. Foster? All right, seeing none. Can we get Mr. Camel back? Mr. Camel, I want to give the task force an opportunity to ask you questions based on what you testified on. Do we have the gentleman?
Sorry, he's getting back in now.
Okay. Task force members, I ask for your patience. He's getting back on.
He's in. You
Okay.
can try to ask him again.
Mr. Camel, can you hear me? Mr. Camel, can you hear me? Does it indicate that he's back on?
He's on. He's in.
Yeah. All right.
I'm sorry, you said Mr. Who?
Okay, we want to make sure the task force, we want to make sure if they have any questions, they get a chance to ask you. Any questions for Mr. Camel, task force members? All right, seeing none, okay. Then we want to make sure we gave that opportunity, so. The next person to testify is Casey Rothstein. Casey Rothstein. Judge. Judge. Your mic's not working.
Oh, okay.
I was not trying to testify for this particular time.
All right, thank you, sir.
Hi.
How's that? Good, okay. All right, Mr. Rothstein, we'll get you when you're prepared to testify on a subsequent agenda item.
They've known you so well, it just shut down.
We're now ready to hear from Tai Chen. Tai Chen, please.
Hi, this is Ty. I also have an employee, my community and education outreach coordinator in the audience. If you guys might break up. But I just wanted to testify about the market structure report. I'm not sure if this is the right time, but we wanted to comment on the licensing fee structure and ask that the task force allow the regulator to come up with fees on licensing for cultivation. You use the current licensing formula. Aloha Green Apothecary, one of the medical licensees, will be paying about $400,000 annually in cultivation fees to grow cannabis. And only at this point this year, really, have we reached economies of scale where we can offer a $200 to $220 ounce to the patient. And that's because we've gotten to a size now into a market position where we can offer lower pricing. When you're operating under 10,000 square feet, it becomes quite difficult.
Somebody
Everybody
muted his
muted?
mic.
I think we've lost some audio.
Audio issue.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify because I do know that people are continuously joining. And just to clarify that we are taking testimony at this time on agenda item 2, which is the report on investigation findings of the Social Equity Working Group. So please confine your testimony to that agenda item so that we can move on to the additional agenda items.
And for
Sorry,
those
please move on, please.
who wish to
Thank you.
testify of medical use, your opportunity will be after this agenda item. Zora Meyer. Only
Hi.
on social equity.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to testify at this time. Appreciate your time. And I do appreciate all those who have contributed to this conversation earlier today. And I really appreciate the focus being on the smaller grower and the families specifically for Hawaii. That is such a need. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Jacqueline Moore on the issue of findings of the Social Equity Working Group. Ms. Moore.
Thank you so much. Jacqueline Moore, CEO of Big Island Grown. We are one of the 8 medical licensees. Just want to say and acknowledge the incredible amount of work that was accomplished by this subcommittee, the Social Equity Subcommittee, in such an incredible short period of time. Just think you guys did an amazing job making sure and taking the time to physically show up to these other outer islands to make sure everybody was heard or had the opportunity to be heard. What I'd like to say is that Big Island Grown supports the creation of a diversified social equity board to ensure that all parties affected by the war on drugs have a platform to be heard and represented. And in addition to that, we also support expungement and community reinvestment efforts as defined by Devon Ward from MPP. Thank you so much for your time. Aloha.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Task force members, any questions for Ms. Martin? For Ms. Moore, I apologize. Any questions for Ms. Moore? Ms. Martin is the next testifier. Hearing no questions for Ms. Moore, we'll move to Jennifer Martin. Ms. Martin, are you prepared to testify?
Yes, hi, can you hear me? Thumbs up?
We can hear you clearly, yes.
Okay. I'm a cannabis consultant. I live on Maui, 10-year Hawaii resident, and I work, I'm a commercial grower, but when I moved here, I had to stop doing that, so I got into consulting. And I work with license holders all over the country and really all over the world. I've talked to a lot of social equity applicants in other states. And I see some of the issues that come up where it's kind of hard. I understand how the task force is kind of stuck in the middle of trying to balance out a lot of interests, and it's hard to come to some kind of workable conclusion, because if you have fully open licensing without license caps, you get an over saturated market like California has right now, and then the prices drop and growers and manufacturers can't sell their product, and it ends up being kind of a bloodbath. And then there's a lot of consolidation where the big businesses come in and just buy up whatever is, going out of business. And then if you do have caps, you have groups with big legal teams coming in to capture those licenses, which is kind of what happened with the medical a few years, back in 2014, 15 here. There are a lot of micro business and social equity programs going on. Problems I see are that it's expensive to get into this business. And so even if you make the applications inexpensive and fairly easy to acquire for social equity groups, they still need quite a bit of investment capital, a couple $100,000 for retail and up to a couple million for cultivation. Even a small facility can be a couple million because of all the air conditioning and dehumidification. So I think there needs to be, there needs to be some funding for those social equity applicants that doesn't require them to go get big business investors. That's one way that can help. Another way is to limit the market to micro businesses for some span of time until those small operators get established. Yeah, and then the residency requirements and having the social equity
And
owners.
Ms. Martin, your time is up. I want
A
to
large
give you
stake in the business.
an opportunity to ask
Thank
you
you.
questions. Task force members, questions for Ms. Martin? I'm hearing none. Thank you, Ms. Martin. The next identified virtual testifier simply says Care Wailua. Care Wailua.
Aloha, everybody.
Aloha.
I was going to try and keep my comments for a lot of others talk, so I'll keep it brief. Hawaii developed the medical cannabis program over 15 years ago now, and this is the program that really could have changed everything. You know, having your 329 card protects you, but having your 329 card and trying to sell cannabis to other people does not protect you, and that is the problem right there. If everybody had 329 cards and they were licensed and had the capacity to do sale to each other, start farms, do all the stuff we've always wanted to do, like way back in the day, these problems would be solved in a large sweep by bringing in dispensaries, for-profit dispensaries. You have failed the whole system. You have now brought in a capitalistic mechanism to sell cannabis that does not honor the 329 card patient, and that's the problem. So dispensaries should have been a nonprofit organization run by the state to get people medical cannabis, and then we wouldn't be having these problems. So you have the answer right in front of you. You have an awesome 329 card program that, if instated properly with the right compliance checks and leaving people alone and respecting that card so they're not harassed by Department of Narcotics compliance checks, we'd already be well ahead of the game. So you really need to review your medical program in place right now and how it's protecting people and how it can protect people if you support it.
30 seconds.
You got it. You know who I am, Care Wailua. We have a large cooperative, and what do? We're not money makers. We're taking care of people. That's what we're doing. People need access to good medicine, and they can't do it if they can't afford it. It's plain and simple, you guys. It's all right in front of you. Before you even step into 21 Rec, look at your medical program and how to empower it. Federally, it's impossible, but on the state level, man, you can empower this 329 card program and move ahead in giant leaps, man. Okay, that's all I got.
Thank you so much.
Aloha.
All right.
Yep.
Timing was perfect. Task force members, any questions for the gentleman? Hearing none, thank you. Final testifier, unless we get additional ones, has simply identified themselves as Hawaii Cannabis.
Thank you, Judge. Aloha mai kako. My name is Brent Norris, and I created an organization called Hawaii Cannabis. We've been holding educational events since 2014. We've done about a dozen events around the state. And I've been testifying at these task force meetings for like 10 years, and I don't see any of that information being pulled back up. It's just kind of what's going on now. And I believe that the precipice for all of this is in the name of safety. And I can tell you, I'm out in the garden every day and it's very safe. And we're now teaching classes to all ages. And so the safety, one of the things that we teach about industrialized medicine is the list of allowed pesticides, fungicides, and insecticides made available by the Department of Agriculture. And I think that they should be in attendance here since they're running a hemp program, which, by the way, is the same plant for those of you in regulation. We got another complaint from one of our local board members, tainted cartridges purchased at a dispensary. The safety part is really concerning because there
I want you to focus on social equity, sir. Anything on social equity?
Well, these are, look, I'm in Mountain View, Hawaii. This is as rural as it gets. There's a lot of poor people around here that think it's safer to go to a dispensary, and that is negligence. It is not necessarily safer to go buy it from a dispensary. It's much safer to get it from an organic farm.
All right, and I'm going to, 30 seconds to wrap it up so we give the task force members a chance to ask you questions. 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'd like to warn my fellow growers, multi-generational growers, to pay your taxes. If they don't come and arrest you for some licensing scheme, they're going to try to arrest you for taxes. And we'd like the state to provide the education that was promised when the initial dispensary bill was passed.
And Mr. Norris, you've exceeded your time. Task force members, any questions?
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. Any questions, Mr. Norris? Okay, that's our last virtual testifier. We have no phone testifiers, which means, Madam Chair, we're now ready to take up agenda item 2, a report by the Social Equity Working Group chaired by Randy Gauntz and Garrett Hondier. And task force members, a general reminder that under the sunshine laws, today you can only listen. At our September 26th meeting, the task force can then discuss the report. So ready
Thank
for the
you.
presentation.
Randy and Garrett, please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Is my screen sharing? Excellent.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. My name is Garrett Hallidier. I was one of the co-chairs of the Social Equity Permitted Interaction Group. I was joined by Randy Gauntz, the other co-chair, as well as Senator Sam Buenaventura and Nikos Leverins. There's obviously a lot more to our recommendations for social equity than we can address in detail today. The purpose of this particular presentation, which is posted online, is to give not just an overview, but a little bit of our thinking behind it and some of the priorities that we encountered as we were going through these recommendations. The mission of the Social Equity Group was to identify Hawaii communities and populations who have been disproportionately impacted by cannabis criminalization, and then make recommendations for social equity and restorative justice that would help to reduce and remediate past and ongoing disparities, including equity in the market, community reinvestment, and expungement and resentencing. And these 3 things listed at the end are kind of the buckets in which we grouped the different recommendations. We have taken this mission and divided it into a few different goals that the committee hoped to address. First, recommending how Hawaii can eliminate the criminalization of cannabis, how we can right the wrongs of the war on drugs, come up with a definition for social equity that can be effectively implemented and to the benefit of those most adversely impacted, recommend how these policies can not only benefit those who wish to engage in the industry, but also those communities who have been most adversely affected over time, recommend a state agency or body that can interact with that that can provide social equity input to the independent regulating body, and that is made up of those who are most representative of those adversely impacted by the war on drugs, and make sure that this was not just ideas coming from out of our heads, but that we had the public input on all of the pieces that we were suggesting. So in order to be doing this thing right, we wanted to make sure that we had data to base our report on. First, we attempted to obtain data from the state and local government stakeholders, but in a lot of cases, they either did not have data or it was not disaggregated from other drug crimes. So it was difficult, it's been previously reported by the legislature, to obtain this sort of data. We did obtain some data from the Pew Research Project, the Last Prisoner Project, and others about the number and kind of spread of inequity in current cannabis enforcement. We also looked to some other state programs, but noted that Hawaii's kind of own situation and demographic distribution is not representative of what's happening on the mainland. We also thought it was particularly important to reach out and hear directly from the communities across the islands. So of our own volition and individually funding, we visited all of the islands, sometimes twice, to hear from stakeholders, legacy market operators, community leaders, patients, advocates, and many more, many of which are on the call today, and we appreciate their input throughout this process. We go into much more detail in the report of Hawaii's kind of long and difficult history with cannabis enforcement, beginning in the 1970s with the passage of the Controlled Substances Act, and mostly just ramping up since then, much of which still exists, and it continues to be federally funded to this day, and which has dramatically and inequitably affected minority populations, in particular Native Hawaiians. So as we approached how to best provide social equity to the population of Hawaii, one of the most important things was how legal cannabis should be to both redress the criminalization in the past and going into the future, so that people are not continue to be put in jail while others are let out for the same activity. So our chief recommendation out of the report is that cannabis in Hawaii should be completely legalized and be scheduled, subject to civil licensing restrictions for cultivation, production, sale, transport, etc., and enforced by an independent regulatory authority rather than law enforcement in the same way that, for instance, taxes are enforced. We could not find a non-arbitrary, morally justifiable way to make a bright line distinguish between how much cannabis I have is legal and, 1 ounce plus 0.1 gram is illegal and worthy of jail time. Current statistics have shown that where there has been a distinction between what cannabis is legal and what cannabis is not legal on the level of amount of possession, whereas the number of prosecutions has gone down in those states, the actual racial disparity in those prosecutions has increased in those states. And so we could find no bright line for which possession should be criminalized and possession should not be, although the activities that you do with cannabis itself should be regulated under the civil licensing authority. And we go into much more detail in the report to that level. One of the most impactful things we found from listening to the community that could be done in regards to remediating the effects of the war on drugs is interacting with the past offenders to both resentence ones that are currently in jail, release the ones who would no longer or should no longer be in jail, and then clear the records, as May said, one of the testifiers in the past, past records, because that is so important for their ability to continue to engage in any portion, in many portions of society. This includes both resentencing and record clearance, both of which should be an automatic process. We know from other states that if it is required of the prior offenders themselves to navigate a process, it is both very difficult, reaches few of the prior offenders, and can often be an expensive and laborious process. So the process of resentencing and expungement, of identifying those who would benefit from it and actually reaching out to contact them and conducting the process, should be through some sort of independent organization, and it should be automatic, filtered through whatever the government process is for expungement. In Hawaii right now, cannabis crimes are not disaggregated from other drug crimes, so it's going to require, whether it's automatic or not, going through all of the past drug convictions and looking at the police reports inside of those convictions to understand whether or not it was a cannabis conviction or not. This is going to be a tremendous amount of work that should likely not be placed within the current budgets of the judiciary or the incarceration system, should be handled separately by an outside organization. One of our recommendations is that should be at the UH Law School, where it can provide jobs, additional training, and take advantage of the legal education of those who are there. To bring these benefits to those who are previously incarcerated for cannabis offenses. One of the other key pieces of this recommendation is that the independent regulatory body, much like alcohol, should be enforced, civil enforcement over what's happening in the cannabis industry. Similarly, civil asset forfeiture should no longer be allowed to be connected to cannabis criminality, and prior instances of civil asset forfeiture, while not able to be reversed, should provide a basis for remediation of some sort from the legislature. This remediation to all of those previously incarcerated, their families, their communities, should include some version of direct payments, educational scholarships, job training and placement, and low interest home, vehicle, and business loans. These were all suggestions made by the community, and they provide the most direct remediation of the war on drugs to those who were most significantly affected by it. In addition, there's a number of kind of places in state law that should be adopted to allow those who either use or grow cannabis either currently or in the future under a legalization scheme to better interact with the world, whether that's making sure that there are clear rules for when businesses can and cannot discriminate against cannabis use, ensuring that cannabis has kind of the same state as alcohol in our family courts, as opposed to the existence of cannabis itself being an adverse realization in custody situations. While we can't affect the federal housing prohibitions, we do want to ensure that at least in state housing, cannabis is not an object to it. Insurance companies have been granting insurance policies to those who can grow cannabis and then denying them on the fact that cannabis is illegal, and we should address that loophole. We should ensure that there is proper training for landlords and others who have to interact with those who grow cannabis, as well as ensure that, especially for all of the recommendations today, that there be allowances for small growers of any of a particular type. There has to be some sort of local banking solution, whether that's through the state, creating regulations that encourage local state banks, or even just a depository at the state itself that doesn't require significant amounts of compliance costs beyond the state of the particular small growers. The regulatory itself should be independent, and within that regulatory authority, there should be separate committees specific to social equity made up of representatives of those adversely affected and the minorities in Hawaii who have the ability to interact directly with the larger independent authority, verify social equity applicants, and recommend other specific remediation tools going into the future, as it should be kind of built directly into how the industry functions. And finally, Randy was going to talk a little bit about equity in the market. Randy.
Sure. Thank you so much, Garrett. I really appreciate it. As we noted before, we really wanted to heavy and front load those two aspects, the community and reinvestment and the expungement and criminal justice reform aspect of it. And then equity in the market. We have some provisions in here to ensure that our social equity applicants have the ability to get into this market, have the opportunity to compete in this market, and try to be successful. So in the first aspect, we have social equity licensing. And we recommend that the rules and regulations to get licensed for the business operations in adult use cannabis industry have low barriers to entry. Not only is that going to bring in the most individuals from the unregulated market, but it's going to allow participation from all stakeholders, and this includes our social equity applicants. And then we will have a process for individuals who apply as a social equity applicant. Social equity applicants have special considerations in the application process. This includes priority in licensing, so kind of getting in front of the queue, essentially, and the regulatory authority should have designated staff working solely on social equity applicants, so they don't have to compete for resources for other applicants as well. Other things that the state should do to support social equity applicants is there should be an office within the regulatory authority similar to the Small Business Association, the SBA, that caters to social equity applicants. This is assistance with business plans, mentorships, trainings for compliance, information briefings for potential social equity applicants, providing small loans and funding to certain social equity applicants. And also, this is an important one, subsidizing mandated technology for regulatory purposes that come as a significant financial burden to social equity applicants. As we've heard from a lot of other states, social equity applicants have a hard time getting up and running. And if there is regulatory compliance issues such as seed sale tracking, things of that nature that could be a financial burden to social equity applicants that the state requires of them, the state should subsidize that for social equity applicants to give them an opportunity to participate in the industry. Additionally, during the transition period, when we talk about transition period, we know that when legalization passes in certain states, this will happen here in Hawaii, that there is a period between the medical market and then the first license being issued in the adult use market. In some instances, in some states, we've seen it being as long as 2 years of a transition period. During that transition period, there is a proliferation of kind of unregulated businesses, untested cannabis being into the market. So to prevent that from happening while we're standing up a regulatory authority in Hawaii, we do have some recommendations during that period. And we do want to support our social equity licenses and social equity applicants during the period. So we want to see that social equity applicants during that transition period are able to produce, manufacture, and wholesale cannabis products that meet the current testing requirements for the current medical cannabis licensee holders in the new supply chain. So this is a diversified supply chain going kind of this horizontal model. And during that transition period, really supporting our social equity licenses and applicants in getting first mover opportunity in this industry. And this will help kind of figure out that backlog that current medical cannabis dispensaries cannot meet when we go like legalization, that we know the demand is going to be very high. 3 to 5x is kind of on the lower end. So we need a lot more production. And again, they have to meet current safety and testing requirements, but we want to be able to have individuals participate in that market and sell to our current medical licensees. And those medical licensees are able to sell in the adult use market until that transition happens. Also, we have affirmative action type protections. So implement specific language to labor practices, to adult use cannabis programs. Licensees promote diversity in the cannabis workforce. We have seen around the nation that a lot of reports are coming out that even in the cannabis industry, as it is currently around the nation, it is heavily geared towards more Caucasian and wealthy individuals. So we want to ensure that there is a diversity in the workplace. And then qualifying as a social equity applicant, this was a tough process to figure out in what ways do we not run up against difficulties in law and saying that you cannot have specific race-based exclusionary policies. But the report came out by the Minority Cannabis Business Association, MCBA, really outlines a really great way to have race-based policies that are compliant with laws. So we did support this with historical data from the impact of the war on drugs, law enforcement operations against cannabis in the state of Hawaii. And these are going to be individuals who can show that they themselves or their immediate family member were harmed by Hawaii's policy on cannabis. They should qualify as social equity applicants. And then those who identify and can prove that they're from Native Hawaiian descent shall qualify as social equity applicants in this framework.
Thank you, Randy. And I wanted to add one more thing in that one of the most kind of common things that we have heard against this kind of civil regulation of cannabis, this civil regulation being so important to the implementation of social equity going forward, is how it interacts with kind of federal legalization right now. Currently, federal enforcement has been defunded, except for the prevention of giving cannabis to minors, incorporating cannabis with other drug use, interstate transfers, interactions with guns, drug driving, and growing cannabis on both state and federal lands. And using cannabis on both state and federal lands. So as long as we have a market that enforces against those types of activities, even at a civil level, we'll still be in compliance with kind of federal regulations at this point, as long as we're enforcing them consistently. Additionally, legalizing cannabis does not leave cannabis in necessarily a wild west of law. It doesn't mean that there is nothing to regulate cannabis anymore. It just means that there is not specific regulations for every part of the industry. We have common law nuisance regulations, zoning, consumer protection laws, billboard restrictions, business registration, tax laws. All of those will be able to will apply to any future cannabis regulatory scheme to ensure that it is a well-regulated industry going forward without having to task the independent regulatory industry with creating out of thin air their own regulations for each part of this. So together we want to build something awesome for social equity. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you both, Mr. Holiday and Mr. Gons. I did want to tell Mr. Gons there were times during your presentation when we couldn't hear you clearly, but I want to remind the task force and the public that the recording will be posted. All right. Before we move to agenda item 3, Madam Chair, wishes to speak. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to remind the task force that we are at time for the meeting, but we will continue until we no longer have quorum. At the point that we lose quorum, we will have to end the meeting for today. And then we can either continue, we can continue the discussion at the next meeting, which will be next week, Monday at 12 noon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's turn to agenda item 3, which is the report on the investigation findings of the medical use working group. We have one person, Ms. Poe, who's here in person, who would like to testify on agenda item 3. To be clear, that means you wish to testify about the upcoming report of the medical use working group co-chaired by Turlin Gorman and Nikos Leverans. So, Ms. Pope.
Is this working?
It is working, yes.
Okay, great. So first, I just wanted to say the report was great. I'm a family nurse practitioner and I really appreciated this report. I wanted to just kind of emphasize the importance of having evidence-based education and safety that's provided by the Department of Health. This is one of the actions that was recommended in the report. Recently, the Hawaii Cannabis Industry Association put out a post on Instagram stating that bud tenders are that they are qualified to give recommendations about dosing to patients. And I want to say that this erasure of medical patient professionals in the cannabis space creates a precedent that has the potential to cause harm. I've had several patients call or go to the emergency room after good intentioned bud tenders told them to use RSO, starting with the size of a grain of rice, which is approximately equal to about 35 milligrams of THC. It's a pretty large dose. I have patients weekly tell me that they're having side effects from cannabis cartridges, including chronic cough, sore throat, and bronchitis after the KOJOIN investigation found lead and nickel in the dispensary cartridges. There was no follow-up with public
Ms. Pope,
education.
30 seconds, please.
And I'm asked weekly about the safety of these products, especially cartridges. In the state of Hawaii, recently banned tobacco vape cartridges. I wonder if that will be extended to cannabis. They say that patients aren't reporting side effects to the DOH. However, the reporting is hard to find on the state. So I would say it's not because it's not happening. I would just say it's not being reported. I recommend a robust training for all bud tenders created by the Department of Health with mandatory certifications like other states are now doing.
All right, Ms. Poe, your time is up.
Thank
I'm gonna
you.
ask to wrap it up. Any questions for Ms. Poe, task force members?
Any question?
Any questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
Please proceed, Dr. Troy.
Thank you. Okay, so I just heard you say that there were some side effects from the use of marijuana and that we needed more testing. I was under the belief that nobody died from marijuana use and marijuana is the same as aspirin. So if somebody bought illegal marijuana that's not tested, so how do we regulate the two?
So this is why I'm calling really for education, especially when it comes to dosing. And when you're talking about cannabis flower grown on farms, it's incredibly safe. It's very hard to overdose on. I'm specifically talking about manufactured products when it comes to concentrates where THC is concentrated, when it comes to cartridges. And, you know, those, although they are available at the dispensary, you know, a lot of this illicit market, which is really safe, is flower. The illicit market is cannabis patients. It's people growing cannabis.
But we just got testimony that from I forgot the gentleman's name, that homegrown organic marijuana is safer and better and dispensary marijuana is no good. So how do I reconcile those statements?
Well, I think that what they're also referring to is that, you know, in the dispensaries, they do allow for remediation for cannabis that has failed testing. So when cannabis fails, cannabis flower fails testing, the dispensaries are able to remediate it using ozone, as opposed to people who grow it at home, who are able to really have tight control of what they're using to grow their cannabis with.
So are you saying that medical marijuana will require the same amount of testing as pharmaceuticals?
No, not at all. I think that especially when it comes to, homegrown plants, we're talking about plants. Especially when people grow their own, we have millennia of data that proves this is safe. Where I'm saying that there is the potential for harm is number one in remediation, number two in concentrates that are both eaten and inhaled. That's where we as a medical community see harm. That's where we see people going into emergency rooms. That's where we see people seeking treatment is for concentrates.
Okay, so if you smoke it, it's cool, but if you have it in a brownie or some kind of liquid or vape, then a lot of regulations is necessary then.
Well, this is where we need to have dosing and dosing guidelines. And if you look at even the most basic statistics from Colorado, what we saw with legalization is ER visits went from 2,000 to 60,000 within 1 year. And a lot of it was due to concentrates and edibles and a lack of education for people who are using this product. If you're saying to give a 70-year-old a grain of rice of RSO, 35 milligrams to somebody who's cannabis naive, this is something that can potentially cause harm. If you're saying the same thing for her to take a puff off of a joint, she's probably not gonna have, she's gonna have a different experience.
So the doctors that prescribe this particular medicine has some kind of exposure on the prescription.
So it's not a prescribed plant, and pretty much all it, and even according to this report, about 70% of patients are using direction given by their certifying provider when it comes to dosing. And if we are not going to be in the equation with adult use, it's something that needs to fall to the Department of Health to provide safety in dosing to not only the patients, but also to the bud tenders, where I just signed off on a program in Ohio that certifies bud tenders. It's like a 2-hour long class. They take a test, they understand the laws, they understand how these products work, and also how to decrease harm from them.
Thank you for the information. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director Choi. Any other questions for Ms. Pearl before we move to our virtual testifiers? Yes.
If I may,
Excuse me, the questioning is from task force members only.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, only task force members.
And I do have not necessarily a question, but a comment for May. I'm very concerned about the fact that you mentioned that you've had patients with adverse effects from products purchased from the dispensaries. And I just wanted to let you know that we did, because of our concerns about adverse effects related to dispensary products, one of the modifications to the amendments to Hawaii Administrative Rules, Chapter 329D, was to require reporting. So if you have reported that you have patients that have had adverse effects from dispensary products to the dispensaries, this information is not getting to the health department, and I would strongly advise you to please report that information directly to the program, and we will look into it. The practices that are occurring at the licensed dispensaries. We are very concerned about about the dispensing practices and and the effect that it's having on any patients. So thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank
Okay,
you.
great. And And I'd be happy to do that, and I'll ask other healthcare providers to do the same, because it's not just me, it's them as well.
Great, thank you very much. We're now ready to hear from our virtual testifiers. Maggie Cole, Ms. Cole.
Hello, I'm not Maggie Cole. I'm using her computer.
Okay, could you state your name?
Yes, I'm David Cole. I'm the co-founder and general manager of Maui Grown Therapies, Hawaii's first licensed medical cannabis company. I was initially reluctant to be engaged with this industry, but was persuaded to join our licensing campaign here in Hawaii by two of our children that benefited from cannabis therapies for brain cancer and combat aggravated PTSD. Over the past year, Maui Grown has served over 5,200 patients on Maui, largely elderly and often on fixed incomes. Over 60% of our product mix is comprised of precision formulations. Many of these products are targeted to ease the symptoms of just a handful of patients. You have my written comments endorsing the recommendations of the medical use working group. I think it's excellent work. I would suggest, however, two additions. First, easing recertification hurdles for patients with chronic conditions. And second, enabling licensed dispensaries to offer clones and seeds to their patients. And so you'll see the argument for that with DOH in my comments. So far, the widespread national experiment in cannabis legalization has been a disaster for serious medical cannabis operators. When adult use emerges in medical cannabis states, the ruthless arithmetic of industrialized production and market consolidation tends to kick in, and it overwhelms local firms.
I'm going to ask you to wrap up your testimony, please.
Yeah, so I'm just saying that great care should be, as I say in my comments, is needed to keep the dual in dual use. One final point, the importance of a fair and consistent application of the law when implementing these policies is important. In Hawaii, we're already seeing cracks in the uniform application of the law, particularly the Frankensteinian program that we have with a registry.
I'm gonna have to stop you there. I'm gonna ask task force members if you have any questions for Mr. Cole. Seeing none, thank you, sir. Jacqueline Moore, I know you've been patient. We called on you previously, and you said you were going to hold off your testimony until now. We're ready to hear from you, Ms. Moore.
Thank you so much. So Big Island Grown supports the recommendations from both the patient protections and the patient public health education sections of the report. Overall, we support the recommendations from the medical considerations section, except for maybe recommendation number 2, which reads, we recommend that THC content per serving and per package allow for higher THC content in medical use products than those approved to be sold on the adult use market. We appreciate the intent behind ensuring a continuous supply of higher potency THC products for medical patients, which may be accomplished with some kind of defined inventory reserve, but we oppose any restrictions placed on THC content or an allowance for higher THC content solely on medical use products. Patients seeking relief for conditions currently not listed as a qualifying condition, those that cannot afford the time or the additional cost of a certifying provider visits, the fee attached to it, or the Department of Health registry process should be able to access the same high quality products in an adult use market. Any restrictions on THC potency in an adult use market really are prohibitionary in nature, and people deserve to access it in any way they deem fit, whether it be through the medical program or the adult use program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Task force members, questions for Ms. Moore based on what she shared. All right, hearing none, we're ready to hear from Abby Amerdash. Ms. Amerdash.
Hello, hi. Thank you for the opportunity for testifying today. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Abby Amirdash, and I'm a nurse practitioner in the state of Hawaii that's been certifying and educating patients about safe and effective use of cannabis since 2017. And I would like to also highlight the issue that May also mentioned, that I also have had patients that had adverse side effects from improper dosing. That's the content that I want to use, the improper dosing. The plant itself is safe for use, but the amounts of THC that are being pushed by a lot of marketing and a lot of for monetary support, like what May was saying, people are pushing RSO on people who are cannabis naive, and we're ending in the ER. Another thing that I would like to highlight is that there is not, is the Department of Health tracking those with Queens Hospital or Straub, anyone that's coming to the ERs or urgent cares with any of those adverse side effects. And I could tell you it's all related to improper dosing. And to clarify for Mr. Choi, medical cannabis and cannabis, the plant itself, there's no distinction between medical or it's gonna have a medical effect. It's how you use it. My concern is with the manufactured products. I do disagree with Ms. Cole about that it's safe to keep it for adult use. There should be a clear distinction between high THC products for medical use and for adult use, because it is.
30 seconds, Ms. Everdash. Please wrap up.
Thank you. Even though cannabis is fairly as safe, but it does have adverse effects in higher dosages, and that should be regulated. I do agree also that bud tenders should not be given any medical advice, or anyone with no medical background should not be giving any advice about dosing guidance unless they've gotten the training and certifications for it. And I'm open to any questions you might have. I've had so many patients actually due to side effects be referred to me from community physicians.
Thank you. Task force members, questions for Ms. Amerdash based on what she shared.
I have a quick question. Thank you for your testimony. Having just returned from California, I'll note that many of the over-the-counter products at the dispensary have a 10 milligram dosing, subdivision, with 100 milligrams being the maximum level of THC, the maximum level that's allowed in a commercially available product. Do you think those levels are sufficient? I remember when Kiva, for example, offered a chocolate bar with 120 milligrams, but in 10 doses. So what's required here beyond that kind of regulation? And how can we better facilitate increased science-based educational materials for consumers of all types of experience?
Cannabis is fairly safe, and it's really dose dependent. The more you take, the more effects it's going to have. And it's the more you take, it becomes, too much of a good thing is not a good thing after all. So with 10 milligrams is honestly, it varies. For someone who's not cannabis naive, 10 milligrams might be an okay dose. 10 milligrams might be a dose that helps someone go to sleep, or 10 milligrams might be a dose that helps someone function, depending on tolerance. But 10 milligrams for someone who's naive can be too much. Cannabis naive can actually be too much. And yes, it's not a prescription that we provide. We only can provide recommendations and guidance. And it's really up to the patient and the bud tenders. And the bud tenders have been wonderful, honestly, in providing education. As we know, every dispensary has their own line of products. So they've been phenomenal in that aspect, where they guide patients between whether something is sedating versus not sedating, or managing their symptoms. But when it comes to dosing, I disagree. That should be left to the provider and the patient. That's the conversation that should happen. And another thing is, we're seeing also, like, there are some, and that's another issue, is there are some certifying providers that are not providing the education for the patients as well, and just leaving it to the bud tenders. So the patient is left in the middle with no safety, to help them. But to answer your questions, 10 milligrams, I think as long as we provide education for both, like the medical task force suggested that we do an educational program for patients, and that's a statewide, that would be something wonderful. And if, as May suggested, we provide education for bud tenders and certification, I think that should mitigate the issue of the safety that we have here.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Amerdash. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question. Sure. Abby, this is Isaac Choi. Okay, so for dosing, I mean, do you have a chart or something that you follow for dosing? Like somebody that's 200 pounds, you're going to give 5 milligrams, and if you're 100 pounds, you're going to give 2 milligrams. And is it just a guess on your part on, or do you try and right? And then if you do give the wrong dose as an APRN, what kind of liability exposure do you have?
Well, I don't give any dosages to anyone. Like I said, I certify people and I provide recommendations for dosing for them.
What's the difference between a recommendation and prescription?
So a prescription, if I give you a certain prescription, for instance, for give you a simple example, prescription ibuprofen versus over-the-counter ibuprofen. You know, if I give you a prescription, I'm going to give you specific instructions on how to use it, and the dispensing pharmacy is going to only prescribe you the amount of pills I give you and all that stuff. Versus when you have a recommendation to use cannabis, I'm telling you that you meet the criteria based on the qualifying conditions of the state of Hawaii, that you meet the criteria to use cannabis. But that is a wide, you know, like how you use it. That's when I personally, and I know May, you know, as well, we educate our patients about how to safely use it, and we educate them about the different forms. So it's a relationship that we ask you. I have to ask, number one, has the patient, are they cannabis naive, or do they have experience using cannabis? Number two, what medical conditions they have, what other medications they are taking, because we forget about medication interactions as well. We forget about also, like, I'd like to know what their little bit of their medical history, because if anyone taking anything orally, that is metabolized by the liver. So if anyone has any liver issues, you have to be aware of all those things. You know, sorry, I lost my train of thought. So when my liability, there's really, I recommend for my patients, you know, to use, like, if based on their, you know, like, of course, their tolerance, how much they've used cannabis, I'll tell them to start with whatever dose. And there are dosing charts that have been established. There's actually lots of research that stems out of Canada. Canada has a program, actually a guideline that is put out for medical providers on how to decrease opioid use using cannabis, and with dosages and all that. And I actually I take it upon myself to do all that, read all that research and educate myself so I can provide, you know, and that's why I have actually, my patients are always thankful for all the recommendations I provide them. I've had patients come in that were referred from, that were certified by someone else, and ended up at the dispensaries, you know, also taking too much, you know, from stuff, and had severe side effects that were referred to me for dosing guidance. And I was able to manage those and refer them back to their PCP.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Choi. Task Force members, any other questions before we move on? All right.
I've got a question. Sorry, I've got questions. This is for Abby. Thank you so much, Abby, for providing your information. I have a question around, you mentioned that it's the dosing that could be potentially harmful, but in the dispensaries, the plant and the product is safe. Is the safe product, would you say that because they have rigorous testing standards that, you know,
no, I didn't say the dispensary. I'm talking about safety. The plant itself in its flower form is very safe. Anytime you go to manufactured products, that's when we start getting into the gray area and like the unsafety issue.
Would you be concerned about products that are not tested, that are manufactured products that are being sold in Hawaii?
In terms of dosing, yes, because if something is being sold, and like, let's say you're saying you're getting a cookie or whatever, and someone tells you it's 10 milligrams, when in reality it has 50 milligrams in it, that could be a safety concern.
Okay.
But what you can, like, when I tell my patients, because some people do get stuff that are not tested, I always tell them to start with small stuff, you know, like
what about flower products that are not tested, that may hold high levels of mold or water particulars, things of that nature?
That, to be honest with you, for anyone who is not immunocompromised, it should not pose a risk factor because you are breathing mold as we speak right now. Unless you have cancer or immunocompromised, I do not recommend, and I do not recommend inhaled products to begin with for anyone like that, you know,
Got it.
unless they absolutely.
Absolutely.
Thank
And
you.
and
Thank you,
do products that are in the dispensary, they are tested for mold particulates, correct?
That I'm not sure. I believe so. I think my understanding is that everything, I'm not sure, you have to ask the dispensary people, but my understanding is that the Department of Health oversees all that testing and that should be tested for mold. And
Great.
all that.
I think I just wanted to make the distinction that I think we've been hearing a lot around testing today, and there are, you know, me personally, I'm a patient, I'm immunocompromised. I have to have products that are tested for my asthma, things of that nature. And I can't, you know, take the risk on smoking, you know, cannabis that has high water particulates, especially mold. And our legal dispensaries are heavily tested, and just want to make the distinction that we are being clear that testing is safe and should be a requirement for anyone who's retailing and dispensing cannabis.
My only thing is that the cartridges, those are really because they're being mixed with other chemicals and stuff that are not, that might be food grade safe, but that are not been tested and they have been proven to be carcinogenic. And that's dispensary or no dispensary, honestly. All those cartridges are harmful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Task force members are prepared to move on, or any final questions for this witness? All right, hearing none. Mr. Como, you're up again, sir. You ready?
Actually, thank you. Actually, I'm gonna keep this short. They're not reporting, but we all know why they're not reporting. Myself, I am a special case because I am a disabled veteran. So mine is UCMJ versus state. But for everyone else, they're not reporting because of law. There's not many follow-up assessments with patients or with the doctors. So that's why the DOH is also not getting, because there's no DOH follow-up with patients directly. There's no military or veteran specialist. So you're losing out on a very large voter block by not having anybody representing the military or veterans on that. Plenty of advice without medical training from the bud tenders is bad. And I know this because I worked with the dispensaries from the summer of 2017 for about a year and a half after that with two of the largest dispensaries in the state. And we did patient education and vaping education, as well as smoking cessation classes. Expanding the scope of practice for medical assistants to aid the doctors and the nurses in cannabis therapy. So the medical assistants can help with the patient assessments. That's about all they can do according to your state laws right now. That might also help with getting these patient assessment numbers up, because you'll have more of a workforce to actually get these assessments done. And making mandatory patient and family education a thing, as well as mandatory training for the dispensary staff. I know that there is training for staff. Again, I actually work at the dispensaries, so I know this and I received the training. But we need more, and we need more consistent. Dosage regulation is difficult with concentrates, so I understand that, but understanding contraindications and bioavailability in the bloodstream is very important. Dr. Sue Sisley did very great research on this. May knows this. May teaches an amazing medical cannabis course. I took it, but I don't qualify to coach, as I am only a certified clinical medical assistant, and that does not protect me with providing medical cannabis education.
Okay, Mr.
So
Como,
that
that's
might
your
be
2
something to
minutes.
look at.
I'm going to ask the task force if they have any questions for you. Task force members, any questions for Mr. Como? I'm hearing none. Thank you, sir. We're now prepared to move to the only name given is a first name, which is Brian. Brian? Brian, are you there?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
We can. Please proceed.
Yeah, thank you. My name's, excuse me, Brian Goldstein. I'm founder of Noah Botanicals, which is one of the licensed medical marijuana dispensaries in Hawaii. And I wanted to address just some of the misinformation that's being conveyed. between the differences between homegrown or gray market cannabis and the cannabis dispensed by sold by legal licensed operators. Excuse me. The notion that somehow homegrown or gray market cannabis is somehow safer than the cannabis sold at licensed dispensaries is really ridiculous, and it's almost laughable. Gray market cannabis does not go through testing. We have no idea if pesticides, when people buy gray market cannabis, they have no idea what the levels of mold are, what pesticides have been used, if there's any heavy metals in the cannabis, and then the notion that this just keeps coming back to me, that collectives are actually collectives.
It's 30 seconds, Mr. Goldstein.
When someone comes to you and says that they run a collective, I would ask you to ask them one question: are you owned by your customers? Because that's a collective. Or are you a company calling yourself a collective? So thank you.
Right. Thank you, sir. Questions from Mr. Goldstein, task force members? Hearing none, we're prepared to move to Tara Rojas. Tara.
Aloha, can you hear me?
We can hear you clearly. Thank you.
Okay. And I apologize, I jumped on, towards the end of the meeting, but I did want to just kind of bring up things that I had discussed with, people that are in the industry and do know. And if you already haven't discussed this, I wanted to bring up the concern that the permits that may be issued, however they may be issued, is there a way to prevent being bought out by corporations? So for example, the emphasis, will preferably be on small local growers to ensure, like the quality of it, because of course it'll, depend on like reputation for them to stay in business, the quality of their products. And then, for example, people that are in the industry, and said that's what happened to California, where permits were given and then corporations came and offered like millions of dollars to buy them out. So will there be a way to prevent that, for a number of years before, they sell it, or to prevent it altogether, to transfer the license or the permits to another person and or these corporations? So that as well as the quality, will there be, a independent lab, that will be able to test for, like, how you were mentioning, the quality of it, the mode, etc. So those two issues, the quality and making sure that this doesn't run amok and get sold out the licenses to corporations.
Thank you, Ms. Rojas. Task force members, questions for Ms. Rojas? Hearing none, we're prepared to move to Zora Meyer. Zora Meyer, please.
Sorry about that. Thank you. I just would like to remember the focus here is the people. We do want to, I would like to personally see that we do regulate it in some way, but not to a point where we take it away from what the point is. We have a huge community of people. I've been raised on Maui just about my entire life, and bringing it away from them would be a huge travesty. Making seeds available, making self-care available, I feel would be a very huge need in this, or I know it's a huge need in this community. And I'm not taking anything from a dispensary. I think there's room for everyone. And, but as a mother, I would like to see the concentrates be more highly regulated. So that's just my comment. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Meyer. Task force members, any questions for Ms. Meyer? Hearing none, we're moving to Dr. Clifton Otto. Doctor?
Thank you. Dr. Clifton Otto, providing comments on agenda item 3 for the medical use working group report. The summary of the findings mentions that they relied primarily on the results of a confidential online rapid survey. So I'm assuming that the presentation will be discussing that today. But I thought it was very interesting to look at the part of the survey that asked people who are negatively impacted by the federal conflict with marijuana, and patients indicated 25%, providers about 22%. And to me, that's a significant number, and did not see anything specifically in the report that addressed that. There were some recommendations that I think tries to get around some of the negative consequences that patients are experiencing, but that does not directly address this federal conflict. I hope you have my written testimony before you. I made several recommendations like protecting and regulating collectives, overhauling the current testing program, having a seed bank for patients, allowing dispensaries to sell seeds and plants, allowing certain providers to decide what qualifies as an adequate supply. But also, I think a lot of this points to an overhaul that's needed in general of the program, hoping that something that can be addressed by the legislature, like having guidelines for providers from the medical board.
And Dr., you have 30 seconds, please. 30 seconds.
Mandatory education for certifying providers, medical cannabis advisory board. And I did my own little survey asking our gubernatorial Democratic and Republican candidates where they stood on HCR 132. The Democratic candidate said yes, he would take action if elected. The Republicans said no. And so I would add a recommendation that the legislature and the next governor take further action to end the federal conflict and protect the state authorized medical use of cannabis in Hawaii. Those are my comments. I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Task force members, any questions for Dr. Otto?
Yes, I have a question. Dr. Otto, this is Isaac Choi. Today we finally got testimony that says the plant itself is not harmful, but when you make distillates or use the THC or other chemicals in the plant in wrong dosage, it could have adverse reactions that put people in the emergency room or put their health in jeopardy. Didn't hear that testimony before in all these meetings. So if that's the case, then medical marijuana should be regulated like a pharmaceutical. Do you agree with that?
Well, so I think with anything that you put in your body, if it's not used properly, there can be adverse health effects. So as I've testified before, it depends on how it's being used and what is the source. I don't think it's appropriate to impose the regulations that go into making pharmaceutical products for every type of cannabis that patients are using. You have to look at how they're using it. And you mentioned dosing. Well, dosing, again, depends on the product, the strength, the route of administration, the other medical conditions that the patient has, and the condition that the patient is trying to treat. So it's a complex array of considerations. And that's why it's so important for those discussions to occur with the certifying provider. So I appreciated the comments from our previous testifiers about that relationship, the importance of that relationship, and the importance of having public education from the department to make sure that patients understand what this doctor-patient relationship requirement is under state law and what they should be expecting and obtaining from that relationship.
Dr. Otto, the other testifiers testified that over-regulation, heavy-handed enforcement, other rules and regulations was either denying access to the product or raising the price to a point where people can't afford it. But everything that just came out of your mouth just is more regulation. I mean, I just can't see. So do we need more regulation because it could harm people, or should we just decriminalize this or legalize it and be done with all this regulation and enforcement?
Well, I would say that we need regulation that matches the use. So it's not just one set of regulations that applies to all cannabis use. I think that is part of what's adding to the regulatory burden of the dispensaries. They're testing every single product through every step of the manufacturing process. And testing unto itself is not a cure-all. You have to look at the current way that the program is structured. There are no national standards for analytical testing for cannabis. So we've adopted standards from other states. We have no gold standard that's being run at the Department of Health State Lab. We have yes.
For medical marijuana, it seems that a whole bunch of testing is necessary to protect people's health. So medical marijuana should be far more expensive just because of the regulatory burden and overhead than recreational marijuana.
Are you serious?
Well, that would imply that we don't care about the health of our adult use users. So again, it comes down to use. If you're an immunocompromised patient,
remove 808 camera from the chat.
If you're an immunocompromised patient, then I think that the testing should be more comprehensive. So again, I think it all comes back to use and to the source and how the end user is going to be administering that to themselves.
Thank you, Dr. Otto. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director Choi. Task force members, I know that you do want to get to the report on the investigation findings of the medical use work group, but we still have some testifiers. We have 3 remaining virtual testifiers. Sanford Hill, Mr. Hill.
Could I ask a question of Dr. Otto first? Do you mind?
Please.
Dr. Otto, in regards to testing requirements, you mentioned that you had some suggestions around regulating those entities that aren't currently licensed medical. Can you expand on that? And are you suggesting that everyone who is dispensing cannabis in the state of Hawaii has their product tested to the current testing standards?
Thank you, Executive Director Gons. So if I understand your question correctly, you're asking about how to regulate testing of material that's not coming from dispensaries. Is that correct?
Correct.
So that, of course, is a complex issue because are you going to try and require that patients growing cannabis at home for their own personal use, that they go through certain regulations? Well, I don't think that's really going to be possible. Are we talking about groups of patients who are producing cannabis together in accordance with state law and just sharing it amongst themselves? Well, that seems like that's kind of a private patient issue. So, and I know this is something that your group has probably addressed, is what's the cutoff? Where do you draw the line between groups of patients growing together for their own personal use that are assuming the risk for that production of an agricultural product? And when does it start to become a public health hazard? And I think that's something that needs to be addressed by the legislature. What is that cutoff? Well, I know that there's a sunset on the number of patients who can grow together. The end of December, it was extended to 2024 to go to 5 patients per property. Well, maybe there needs to be a limit on that. And maybe there needs to be regulations for collectives or groups of patients over a certain amount where they have to comply with certain regulations. I would hope that such groups would be able to contribute, and I think you've talked about this, be able to contribute to an adult use market. So that's, I think, where a regulatory structure would make sense. And that requires an understanding by our state lawmakers of what patients are doing and what their needs are. And there needs to be a lot of education in that area still.
Thank you.
Does that wrap it up for Dr. Otto?
Just one more quick. Would you say that you mentioned that there is a risk. Would you say that there's a significant risk to those medical patients consuming untested products?
So I don't have any idea of what patients are using. That's part of the reason why I do not recommend that patients engage in the medical use of cannabis. I know some of my colleagues did mention that. And I would suggest that they stay away from this term recommend. Of course, we can't prescribe because I don't know what my patients are gaining access to. I cannot comment on whether it's dangerous or not. So that's just beyond my awareness. And I consciously stay out of that because of my DEA prescribing registration, which prevents me from being engaged with helping patients gain access to an illegal Schedule I drug. So my involvement ends at certification and providing ongoing education for my patients so that at least they have somebody to talk to about what they're doing or what they're using.
Thank you, Doc. All right, does that do it, task force members, for Dr. Otto? All right, we're ready to hear from Sanford Hill.
I'm sorry, Judge Roderick, this is Michelle. I just wanted to make a comment to just let some speakers know that if you have already testified on this agenda item, please do not raise your hand again to testify again. You have a 2-minute time limit per agenda item to testify.
Yeah, and
Thank
the
you.
remaining virtual testifiers on my list have not testified yet on this item.
Correct.
So Sanford Hill.
Yes, it was just a reminder. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sanford Hill.
Yes, my name's Sanford Hill. I am an original grower from 50 years ago who created the Maui Wowie strain that's being used in medical marijuana all over the world, which has nothing to do with what I created. Before the medical marijuana industry was invented, we gave marijuana to people for medical use. We didn't ask what they're using for, but they used it for all kinds of medical use. No one ever had a problem with it. It's been going on for long before the medical marijuana industry was invented. And I'd like to state that unless you bring in the legal growers, you're not going to be able to compete with them. They will be able to grow cheaper without tax burdens, without all the oversight. And everybody, your own guesstimates say that 80% of what's being sold in Hawaii is sold illegally. And there's a reason for that. It's been done for so long. These people are branded and well-known. And unless you bring them into the medical marijuana industry and the recreational or adult use industry, which I see no difference in, it's not going to work. The whole structure that you're making, we know that you're not going to be able to use law enforcement to keep out illegal growers from the medical marijuana industry. That won't work. It's been tried, hundreds of millions of dollars thrown at it. So what are you going to do?
You have 30 seconds, Mr. Hill, 30 seconds, please.
That's the question I have. What will you do for the vast, very established marijuana industry that's existed for a long time in order to allow this new legalized marijuana industry to succeed?
All right, thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Hill, task force members? I'm hearing none. We're ready to hear from Kara Wailua. Kara Wailua.
Thanks, you guys. I think we try not to go off script very much with the stuff we're starting to talk about, but as you realize, we have about 80 participants on this line and over 100 at one time. So I think it's very valuable when people start talking about cannabis testing, such as Randy Gauntz, and water particulates and mold and stuff like that, that people really know what's going on. We all know now that the Department of Health dropped the yeast and mold testing because it was wrong. Outdoor growers couldn't succeed in many states. And so a lot of this education just needs to happen. And it seems like it's happening with you guys at the office. And that's really hard for the listener to figure out, you know, like tax people asking questions about, you know, how strong is medical? How should it be regulated when they're studying on tax stuff? There's some huge learning curves, we know, and we appreciate it, right? But it's really hard for someone who's zooming in to understand this stuff and go, hey, well, how do I help? What do we do? You just heard from a legacy grower that created Maui Wowie and why people are not joining the medical program. So there's a lot of things going on. We heard from a dispensary owner, I think his name's Goldstein, that's saying, you know, it's a laugh that collectives have to test their flower and stuff. And so these kind of comments and stuff are really destructive in this energy right here that we're trying to move ahead and make something happen with the 329 patient program, you know? And so I would just say, I know you guys are working hard and there's a lot going on.
30 seconds.
No problem at all. Yeah. And I'm just providing constructive criticism. And I just, THC levels, stuff like that. We need to all learn about that stuff. There's a lot going on here, guys, and you can see how much time it takes up in these task force meetings. So I think there's got to be a better way to really start having conferences and have constructing conversations about these kind of things, because they take up a lot of time, as you guys can see. I'm very thankful, though. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for the gentleman from Carolina? All right, Sam Delapaz, Mr. Delapaz.
Hi, I'm currently in bad service. If James Anthony would like to go first, I'll go after him.
You want to go after Mr. Delapaz, after Mr. Anthony?
Please, thank you. Just picking my kiddo up from school.
Okay, all right. Mr. Anthony, are you prepared to go? Mr. Delapaz is not available right now. You ready to go, Mr. Anthony?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please proceed.
You know, I find myself in the interesting position of I want to recognize Mr. Choi, who is not in the medical field. He's in the tax field, and yet he's very, very focused on these medical issues. And he just said an interesting thing, which is that, well, maybe we should just decriminalize, deregulate, and be done with it. And I would suggest that he's on to something there. You know, he's very concerned about, oh my goodness, these overdose.
We've lost you. If you can hear me, we have lost your connection. We'll just wait a couple seconds longer. Okay, Mr. Anthony, I'm going to go back. Mr. Delapaz, are you ready to testify? Mr. Delapaz, are you ready to testify? All right.
Hello.
Yes.
I'm here. I don't know if my service is going to be good enough. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hold on one second. Mr. Anthony, are you
Hang on, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I was just making the point in agreeing with Mr. Choi that this thing doesn't need to be regulated. It can be treated like alcohol. And really, I think then what, you know, when you talk about all of these testing issues, oh my goodness, testing should be optional, and we should focus on education of consumers and patients. So then if they want tested medicine or tested products, they can choose to buy that. And they could choose to buy different levels of testing if that was of concern to them after being educated. And finally, as for the NOAA Botanicals little ad hominem pejorative rant, there are many reasons to find homegrown and sun-grown cannabis preferable. It's environmentally sustainable. There are cannabinoids that occur only in full sun-grown cannabis. And, you know, consumers and patients are entitled to these preferences. And the mere fact that you grow your cannabis in a brick warehouse under artificial lights in no ways entitles you to cop an attitude of superiority. And I found that most distasteful and disquieting. And I will certainly consider that when recommending or not recommending dispensaries to my friends and associates. I think that's all that I have on that matter. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Anthony. Any questions, task force members from Mr. Anthony? All right, hearing none, Mr. Delapaz, it's now or never. Are you ready to testify? Okay, I'm gonna have to move on.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you clearly. Please proceed.
Great, thank you so much. I really hope I don't lose you here, but just like to emphasize
Mr. Delapaz, we're not able to hear you clearly.
About that.
You might be in an area where we can't hear you. Just try a little bit longer, and we're gonna have to move on if we're not able to hear you clearly. Go ahead and speak again.
Okay, can you hear me all right now?
We can. If you can proceed, that would be great.
Great, thank you so much. Yes, I would just like to, you know, speak primarily to the fact that I believe that medical use and patients are of the utmost importance. In so many states, we have seen patients left behind California, again, a prime example, and the state that I hail from the legacy farming and legacy cannabis community. It is incredibly important that access be available to medical patients, and that the legacy caregivers and pioneers that stewarded this plant that understand it better than anyone have a voice at the table. So again, I encourage the advisory group to be diverse, robust, and include legacy caregivers, patients, and businesses alike. I do want to emphasize that I see there being even a potential for a low to no cost access program for low socioeconomic status. If there's a booming tourism economy and industry enough here in the state of Hawaii for that to become a reality, it would be the most amazing thing for patients in any state ever. Again, I think this is an iterative process. I think it's very important to have the right people at the table and to continue to
You have
iterate
30
through advisory.
seconds, Bill, pause 30 seconds, please.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to emphasize the importance to iterate through an advisory committee, stakeholder and patient engagement. Incredibly important. I think that's where, yes, there, as you guys can tell, there's a lot of moving parts here to legalization, but having the experts at the table and helping to guide meaningful legalization before just pulling the top off of things and having untested, unregulated cannabis is incredibly important. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Task force members, questions from Mr. De La Paz. And when we are done, we have one more virtual testifier. Any questions by the task force? Hearing none. Zoe, you are our last virtual testifier. Zoe?
Aloha, can you hear me?
We can hear you clearly. Please proceed.
Thank you very much. I'm obviously not Zoe. My name's Chad. I'm using my wife's computer. Just wanted to touch base. I'd spoken the last meeting, and again, we find ourselves here with truly uneducated decision makers around this plant, the endocannabinoid system, all the way down to these questions about dosing and many other factors that we've talked about today. I do give everybody on this task force a lot of credit. A lot of thought, time has been put into this, and I think it can be continued with proper education and including the right people. We have a medical market here in Hawaii. It's the only market we're servicing. When we really look at it, access to affordable medication should be not only a grower, the consumer, but also these dispensary owners' number one focus. We clearly see that they and their constituents have failed to affordable access to medication, but they still want to sit in these meetings and bark around their future dollar and their future business constituents and who own those contracts, mainland cooperatives and corporations for the bottom dollar, why he is sitting there speaking on their behalf. And I think everyone who's educated around this plant clearly saw the blasphemy around that. That's all I have to say today. Thank you.
All right. And Chad, are you comfortable telling us your last name?
I'm sure you can look it up in the medical registry. I'm good on that.
All right. Okay. I just wanted to use it to ask our task force members. Task force, any questions for Chad? All right, hearing none. Do we have any phone testifiers? All right, so we're now ready to take up agenda item 3, a report by the Medical Use Working Group, co-chaired by Terry Lynn Gorman and Nikos Leverance. And task force members, again, today you can only listen to the report at our September 26th meeting. The task force can discuss the report. Co-chairs, we're ready to hear your report.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. This is Terry Lynn Gorman. I was asked to represent Maui County Mayor Michael Victorino on this task force. The reason that he asked me to represent him is that I was one of the founding staff members of Maui Grown Therapies. I left that position in 2020 to work at the County of Maui, and Mayor Victorino asked me to sit on this task force. I would like to say that as my position at Maui Grown Therapies, I had the benefit of learning from some of the most esteemed medical cannabis researchers in the United States, medical professionals. And I feel very strongly about medical use of cannabis, which is why when Michelle asked if I would be interested in chairing this group, I said yes. Our group had the opportunity to deploy a cold online survey, email survey. And we're fortunate that out of the 33,000 on the medical cannabis registry, that we got approximately 10% response, which is about average for a cold email survey. It was, which typically goes between 8.5 to 10%. We did get a 10% response rate. I also want to thank Dr. Lynn Lee, who is the she's the medical cannabis program epidemiologist. She's highly experienced in surveying, and she assisted our group with deploying this survey along with the Cannabis Registry Office. So thanks to Tammy for that. This meeting has gone much longer than I anticipated, so I'm going to be brief with my report today, and then I'm going to turn it over to Nico Sleverins, who will be discussing the recommendations that we made. We were aware, especially myself, having worked in a dispensary and having dealt with patients one-on-one, as well as knowing medical patients in my personal life, some of their concerns and worries about the medical use of cannabis. We were aware of some of the issues that came out that didn't, informed us in our survey before we began. I would, speaking on behalf of our group and also on behalf of the survey results, we found that that they're very concerned about patients in other states that were unable to get medical cannabis when an adult use program was legalized. There is little attention put on the needs of medical use patients when adult use has been legalized in other areas. And often the medical products are sold out and the patients are abandoned in a situation like that. We know right now that we could not measure the impact of an adult use legalization on the existing medical cannabis program, but it is something that we need to be aware of. We did 2 anonymous email surveys. One was for patients and caregivers, and we also did one to certifying professionals, that would be doctors and APRNs who do certify patients. And to Representative Choi, you asked some very good questions, and I will quickly respond to your concerns. Number one, because of the legal status of cannabis in the United States, there's very little information available to MDs and APRNs on dosing, effects, interaction with medications, and other information like that. It's unfortunate, but that is the way it is. In my experience during our training, having had an opportunity to speak with medical cannabis researchers that are MDs and have used it clinically, we were able to learn about resources that are available in other nations, including studies that address issues such as drug interaction, recommended dosing, how to coach patients to titrate their own dose for their particular situation. Now, similarly to COVID, that has different effects on people depending on their immune system, as well as any pre-existing health conditions. It's similar with the use of medical cannabis, and doctors like, or medical professionals like Dr. Otto and Ms. Faumaonapo and Ms. Aberdash are aware of those types of considerations, but I agree with those who said that few of the dispensaries have shall we say, consistent training for their staff to understand some of those issues. And that shows up in our report as well. Some of the findings that we had is that if patients always have a steady supply of medical cannabis, it's difficult for them to define potential barriers that may exist in an adult use market. We also tried to determine where they were getting their products and if they were having problems using the existing dispensaries. And we also wanted to know that if an adult use program were to come to Hawaii, would they remain in the medical use program? So the results that we came with is that most of the patients currently say they are able to get the products they need. 9 out of 10 said always or often they are. And if not always, the reasons they gave were the dispensaries were located too far away. And I know in my experience working on Maui that we did have patients that would drive in from Hana once or twice a month to get what they needed. They couldn't afford it or it was not available at the dispensary. And some of the products are only available at 1 or 2 particular dispensaries, and they felt that they were concerned about the inability of traveling inter-island with the products of their choice. Some have a debilitating condition and no transportation. So especially during COVID, we saw that with some of our older patients that just did not want to take a chance of leaving their home and going out to get their products. 86% said that they get their products from dispensaries. 55% said that they get them only from dispensaries. 1 in 3 grow their own at home. 3% grow in a so-called collective, and 2% purchase online. I don't know how anybody is purchasing online legally, but that's what the results said. Would they remain in the program if adult use were legalized in Hawaii? 1/3 of them were unsure, saying that they would if there were special considerations for registered patients, such as a tax break, receiving discounts, getting priority access for purchasing products, and the consideration that the medical use program products, especially for palliative and cancer patients, they do need to have higher doses of THC depending how long they've been on medical cannabis and if they've developed resistance to the effects of medical cannabis. Providers said that they mostly thought that legalized use would have a negative effect on their medical practice and their ability to provide patient care. And I know there's been a lot of comments today about negative side effects from use of cannabis. And I just want to say that that applies to not just cannabis, it applies to medications, it applies to supplements, it applies to many things that people use to get relief. And it's an individual thing. So I think it's quite, I don't know what the word is. I think it's quite insincere to say that this is always a safe therapy for everybody, no matter what. That is simply just not the fact. Although it is true that nobody's died from it, it's not to say that nobody suffers from side effects from it. Patients have heard that it's difficult to access products when medical programs, patients have said that they've heard that it's difficult to get their medical products in an adult use type of an environment. Those that were having problems with the existing program, and I want to credit Dr. Otto for bringing this up many times, that the conflicts between federal law and state law do cause problems, not just for patients, but also for the medical providers themselves. Specifically, our patients stated not being able to get a gun permit, that many of them had problems with employment. They had to stop using medication, especially pain when they're using it for pain, in order to pass a a new higher drug test. If some places still have random drug testing on the job, and even though they may not be impaired at work, the fact that they have metabolites of THC consumption in their drug test, that they've lost jobs and that they don't have an opportunity to get future jobs. They're not able to use in a public location. In fact, many of the patients who do use cannabis for pain and prefer that to opiates and other prescription medication found that not being able to use that in a hospital environment was very difficult for them. And also those who attend school that rely on cannabis to help them with seizures and such, they found that difficult. There's also a barrier to public access because of the federal prohibitions. And so folks that do have medical cards kind of have to hide it from HUD and other federal entities because they may be not allowed to get housing or assistance for their housing. And of course, many of them stated that it's financially burdensome because there is no reimbursement for from insurance for use of medical cannabis. I think I'm going to stop there because this is quite lengthy, and I will turn it over to my co-chair, Nikos Leverins, who will talk about the recommendations that we made in our report. Nikos?
Excuse me, Judge, I don't mean to interrupt real quick. I had a comment in my hand raised on the last round and I was not able to get through, but I was in line. So is it possible?
You're absolutely correct. We're prepared to hear from you now. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much for
You're the
your time.
last testifier, but you're right, and we missed that, so please proceed.
Okay, thank you for that. I just want to say good afternoon, honorable members of the task force. I genuinely thank you for your opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Amy Donzis. I was previously the marketing director at one of Hawaii's 8 licensed dispensaries, and I'm currently a member of the Hawaii Cannabis Hui. I'd like to thank the task force social equity team members who invested their time to produce the social equity report. I'd also like to ask the entire task force, when considering social equity, to keep in mind that 1, there are 0 Native Hawaiian members on the dual use of cannabis task force. 2, there are 0 Native Hawaiians on the task force social equity working group. In fact, one of the task force members overseeing the task force social equity report is the director of the Hawaii Cannabis Industry Association, also known as HICIA. HICIA refer to themselves on their website as the voice of Hawaii's licensed medical cannabis dispensaries. To many local farmers and those who are seeking an aloha aina-driven industry, HICA's involvement in the production of the social equity report is seen as a conflict of interest, one that does not represent the voice of Hawaii's people. HICA's stated purpose is to support the goals and legislative agenda of the 8 licensed dispensaries. Hawaii's legacy farmers who have supported Hawaii's cannabis patients for decades, long before dispensaries existed, and still provide the majority of Hawaii's cannabis today, as per HICA's February report. I believe the task force to successfully roll out a due use legalization in Hawaii, reaching out for further guidance from local social equity cannabis groups such as the Hawaii Cannabis Hui is necessary in developing the policies and laws required that will include the voice and needs of the local community. I'd like to also remind everyone on this call that this is not us against them. It is all of us against the end of prohibition and creating a history we can all look back and be proud of. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Amy. Although you did combine social equity and medical use, we'll allow you to have done that. Task force members, any questions for Amy before we hear from the recommendations in the report?
I do have a statement more so than a question, and it's a correction. Both Amy and Mr. Madero stated earlier that there are no Native Hawaiians on this task force. I'm sorry, but I find that offensive.
I'm sorry, I do say with the exception of you. My apologies. I didn't realize
I
you were
do
on.
have Native Hawaiian ancestry, and my family goes back to these islands, whether Hawaiian or otherwise, goes back to before the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian Islands. So I am offended by the fact that people keep saying there are no Native Hawaiians on this task force. I very much am Native Hawaiian. In fact, I'm the former president of the Maui Native Hawaiian Chamber of Commerce. So I want to correct that misinformation. Thank you.
I think that was a very important. Amy, we're not taking any further comments. That was not a question. We're ready to hear now from Mr. Leverins on the recommendations on the findings of the medical use working group. Please proceed.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for sticking with us. I am not going to go through the list of our recommendations one by one, but instead I'm going to highlight what we consider to be some of the more important recommendations for the medical use community going forward. As our document and details, we've grouped it into three broad categories: medical consideration, patient protections, and also patient and public health education. We still have a lot of work to do on each front. So going forward, with respect to medical considerations, our group recommends that all registered medical cannabis patients retain their right to grow their own cannabis plants and or designate a caregiver as currently provided by law. Same time, we recommend that all cannabis and cannabis products intended for sale or distribution be subject to the same testing standards currently provided by law to ensure safety and quality of all commercial cannabis statewide for medical use. Third, we recommend the elimination of a state-determined list of qualifying conditions as a requisite for registration on the medical cannabis registry, and instead respect the doctor-patient relationship or provider relationship by allowing qualifying physicians or APRNs to make the determination. Fourth, we recommend that registered medical cannabis patients remain exempt from any new taxes that may be levied on the sale of cannabis or cannabis products in an adult use program. And fifth, we recommend that medical cannabis dispensaries be authorized to provide delivery services and curbside pickup to better protect patient health and privacy and to help ensure access for homebound patients, those in palliative care, and those with compromised immunity due to pre-existing health conditions. In terms of patient protections, this goes back to a recommendation from the last cannabis working group. We would recommend that legislation be introduced and signed into the law that would provide for employment protections for medical cannabis patients, including hiring, discipline, and termination actions. A positive drug test for cannabis metabolites should not be proof of impairment on the job, and employers and insurance companies should be prohibited from medical discrimination. And on the patient and public health education front, we recommend that the State Department of Health develop and deploy a public health education campaign about medical cannabis use, safety considerations, and how to identify signs of psychological dependence. We also recommend that the University of Hawaii John A. Burns School of Medicine include evidence-based and unbiased medical cannabis education as part of its curriculum for medical professionals, similar to the National Council on State Boards of Nursing's 2018 recommendation for caring for the medical marijuana patient. So in summary, we would like, to see that the interests of patients are protected in a prospective adult use cannabis system, dual use system. Mahalo.
Thank you very much, co-chairs Gorman and Leverens, for that report. Just to remind the task force that you'll be able to discuss the medical use working group findings at the next meeting on September 26th. I think Madam Chair has a question to pose to the task force at this point. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Judge Broderick. Okay, so we are approaching 3 hours and we are unfortunately only halfway through our agenda. So I'm going to pull task force members at this time. Could you just please respond as to whether you are able to and wish to continue today's meeting, or if we should adjourn? So first up, Dory Palkovich.
Yes, I would like to adjourn.
Okay, thank you. Joanne Takeuchi.
She had to leave.
Okay, thank you. Isaac Choi.
Dr. Colby will not be available in the next meeting. We can adjourn now, but cannot my report be done when he is available?
Okay, well, it'll probably mean that I'm going to have to reschedule because it's on the agenda for the meeting, next meeting. We'll figure something out. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's adjourn. I'm kind of tired.
Okay. Let's see, Ellen Chang.
Adjourn.
Okay. Terry Gorman.
I would like to adjourn. I have a real job I have to get back to here. Thank you.
Okay. Randy Gantz.
I'm here for it. If we need to push, I'm here to push.
Okay. I believe Wendy had to leave. Nikos Leverance.
I'm willing to power through, but like Terry, I have a list of things and I have another commission to work on.
Okay. And Garrett Halladyer.
I'm fine either way.
Okay. I guess will be to me, and I am going to recommend to adjourn because I also have other work that I need to get done today. So I'm going to call this meeting adjourned to inform everybody that the next meeting will be held next week, Monday, September 26th. And we do have an agenda posted already for that meeting. I will see how we go about deferring the discussion for the tax working group since Director Choi's assistant is not going to be available for that discussion, but we'll figure it out and it'll be publicly posted. Thank you very much for everybody's patience and attendance and participation.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, everybody. Aloha.
Mahalo, everybody.
Hello.